Welcome everybody to another live cast here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. Once again, I am still Josh Bycer, and we got a great cast for you tonight. We're going to be discussing some of the major do's and don'ts when it comes to first-time game development. Some of the common pitfalls we see developers who are either first-timers or students tend to fall into when it comes to that tricky quagmire we call game design. And joining me as my guest tonight, he is Tim Rustwick.
I remember when I first got started.
And I just posted your thing. There you go. And he runs a YouTube channel, Game Dev Underground. So, how are you doing tonight, Tim?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I am doing well. We survived the storm over here somehow. So, how are things down with you?
With like snowstorms, craziness.
It's definitely been a crazy week, at least for me around here. I've been doing some updates to my channel after our chat the other day. I've updated the thumbnails and trying to make things a little bit more appealing for all the new folks, such as, I guess, your fine followers who are coming in to talk with us.
Yeah, I see a few of them. I recognize some thumbnails.
So, while we wait for more people to get in here, I guess to begin with, for people who aren't following you, some of the people on my side or new developers, could you talk a little bit about your background and what your YouTube channel is all about?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to make stuff ever since I was a little kid. So I started making games when I was in middle school, and I loved making games. But for whatever reason, I got discouraged from, family and friends, and I just thought it wasn't viable to do long term. So I kind of left it and got into some other stuff. And I had written some software, I learned some marketing, started a marketing company. And then when I sold the marketing company, I got back into game development, and I've been doing it for a couple of years now. And I started the YouTube channel because one of the things that I realized that was so difficult for me as a game developer was not the technical aspect. Like, I never really struggled with the programming. I was always good with programming. I always knew artists, or I could, get art done. It was the mental aspect, the finishing, the powering through, the long-term, like sticking to stuff, not jumping to new projects. So that's kind of what my channel is about. It's about how to actually finish stuff and finish games and build games. Not so much the technical, here's how to do this, but here's how you should design, or here's the things you should think about, or here's what your players should feel. And it's worked out so far. Been at it about a year, and it's been fun.
Great. Yeah, I know when we talked about this last night, or I saw it 2 nights ago, the video that I did over on your channel went up earlier today. But as we talked about, game design is just a very multifaceted topic. It's one that we can explore at just about any length and any number of various fields. And it is very challenging for new people to try and jump in and understand things. Because from people that I've spoken to, developers all across the industry, is that just because you're a good programmer or you're a good artist, that doesn't mean you understand design philosophy. Doesn't mean you can understand what makes a UI attractive to someone who's either spent 80 hours playing your game or spent 8 seconds. And
Totally.
it takes a lot to make that game. And when I say quote unquote that game, I'm talking about that dream game of yours, the one that I'm sure everybody who's watching has one. I'm sure you have one as well. I have like 5 or 6 boiling around in my head at the moment, and it's very easy to fall into beginners' traps or beginners' mistakes when it comes to game design, because as I'm sure you're no doubt aware, Tim, there's no such thing as, the magic checklist for how to make a perfect video game.
100%. And I think game design too is so hard that I actually recommend that people making their first game don't actually design it. That they pick a game that's already designed, like Pong or Space Invaders or something like that, that already has the design down, because game design itself can be so difficult, and it's so frustrating sometimes to figure out what works, what's fun, what's not. Do the people like this, or are they just telling me they like this? Like what, So I 100% agree.
Yeah, and we hear different strategies from people all across the internet or all across the industry as to what's the best way to get started. I'm sure you probably have heard everybody's favorite term where everyone just says just make video games and it will all turn out well. And I've tend to fight back against that because, again, when it comes to game design, a lot of things that can ruin you are things you don't know about. And it's very important, I think, early and often to get that kind of outside feedback. I've spoken to independent developers who've, you know, praised early playtesting and iteration when it comes to creating a video game. And it takes so much effort sometimes to make a game that you really don't see it. There's another very popular term. The last 10% is where you're going to spend 90% of your time doing. That
Totally.
quality of life polish. That for those of you watching this right now, I'm going to probably be returning to that term early and often for our chat tonight. But quality of life, when it comes to those kinds of enhancements, it doesn't sound all that impressive. You know, when you're putting next to achievements and loot box design and stuff like that. But I find that's one of the easiest ways to sync a game when your game is just completely unruly and you just cannot figure it out.
Yeah, if your game gets in the way of people playing it, it's definitely something that can stop them.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we get, I guess, more in depth into our chat, then, just again for the folks on my side or new people watching, in terms of some of the videos that you put out or some of the content that you do on your side, Tim, could you, I guess, go over things a little bit briefly for people tuning in?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that I post is motivation, like how to be a finisher, how to actually finish stuff, how to be a little bit more productive during your days, how to stick with things when you otherwise might not stick with them. A lot of mental health stuff, like how to take care of yourself mentally. It's a lot of stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with game design, to be honest, because I feel like that part is so important. But also, like, there's a lot of design related stuff. I talk about level design, I talk about feedback loops, I talk
Mm-hmm.
about like things that you can do to increase your retention, increase the playability of your game, like help players play your game, and also some like pitfalls of stuff that you do sometimes that I think mistakes that we all make,
Mm-hmm.
kind of, that can really put players off. And I think the mistakes are probably a big one because I mean I just did a talk at the Pro Indie Dev Conference about 37 mistakes
Mm-hmm.
game developers make, and yeah, man, like my channel is basically guys, I did some stuff and it was wrong and it was horrible and people hated it, and here's what I learned.
Yeah.
And I just kind of share my mistakes on my channel.
Yep, and again, when it comes to those mistakes, and for developers who I've spoken to, it can be very rough as a developer when those mistakes aren't caught until it's either too late or you're just at a point where you can't do anything about it. Because
Totally.
when it comes to the independent side, you really only have one good chance to make a first impression of your game. And if your game fails right out of the gates, chances are it is not going to be on anyone's wish list in 6 months to a year, even if you do put that work into it. And I have seen developers, instead of trying to rush a game out, they will, hold on to it for as long as possible before going on to early access and then waiting even longer before it goes on to 1.0. Because those milestones are a very big thing and they're a very scary realization for a lot of developers.
Totally.
Now, with that said, though, I think let's jump into our topic. And for people watching, I guess on my side, I know you were telling me about this on our chat Tuesday that you play student games or first time games every Friday. Is that right?
That's correct. We do like Feedback Friday. We're doing it weekly right now. We may move to monthly at some point, but it's fun to kind of every week see what everybody's making and play through it and give first impressions.
Mm-hmm. And again, getting that early feedback is crucial for you to just basically be able to grow your game. And one of, I think, the hallmarks for our talk for tonight is going to be getting feedback when it comes to your game. You cannot just work on a game for 2, 3 years, never show it to anyone, and then one day launch it on Steam, and everyone's going to fall in love with it. And I've spoken to people who've had those friends of friends who they just basically disappear for 2 years to develop a game, and then who's going to know about it when it comes out?
I've done that. I've legit done that. Like I spent my a lot of my middle school and high school years working on games that I just never showed anybody.
Hmm.
And uh and then I would like think that when I was presenting it to the world would just be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, Tim spent all this time on this game." And then like there would be a parade and there would be like some penguins there and everybody would be happy and like rainbows and sunshine and
Mm.
that's not how it works.
No.
Everybody's just like, "Oh, cool. Um, I want
Yeah.
to play this though."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Guys, but you don't understand.
Hmm.
I spent 2 years on this." And they're like, "Yeah, but Halo's better." I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah, I think that's a very important lesson as well. Nobody cares how long you spend working on a video game. They care about the finished product. And I know that can be very disheartening for a lot of developers because one of the things that we've talked about many times here and with other guests is that game design is both an art and a craft. It is the marriage of entertainment and programming. And
Totally.
people do not care if you struggled for the last year and a half because you couldn't fix a scripting bug or your game engine wasn't properly optimized. They care that they load the game up and the game doesn't crash or destroy their computer when they start running it.
Well, games too. Games are the only medium on the planet that can block you from accessing them
Mm-hmm.
based on issues that you have. Like if controls are bad, the game can block you from
Oh,
playing the
yeah.
game. If the game is too hard, it can block you from finishing and finding out the story. Like music doesn't do that. You listen to an album, it doesn't say, "Oh, now
Mm-hmm.
you got to play the
Yeah.
right instrument to get forward." Movies don't do that. They don't say, you got to get up and shoot a bunch of people and show us that you know what you're doing. But games, they can literally stop you from
Mm-hmm.
consuming the content. And a lot of mistakes that people make that I see is like things that the player doesn't care about stopping them from enjoying the experience. Like controls are a big one. UI is another big one. Objective is another big one, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
things that can literally get in the way of people playing your game. And that's the last thing you want to do. You want them to be
Mm-hmm.
immersed and forget that they're in the world. You want them to just be in your world.
Yeah. And UI design by itself, that's a hour and a half, 2 hour podcast we could talk
Yeah.
about. It is a very
Yeah.
complicated topic. Again, it goes back to that combination of entertainment and programming. You can design the most technically optimized game in the world and have a completely horrible UI that no one can follow unless they actually built the game with you. And
Yeah.
again, I have seen this from a lot of developers. I just did a play of this game called Kite, which I'll be doing a video spotlight probably in the next few days for those of you watching this recorded. And the UI is kind of like these just massive chunks in each corner of the screen that's actually blocking the main game screen. And again, it doesn't sound as bad as what I just described. And if you're a first time designer, you're probably thinking, what's the big deal? But when you start thinking about things forward, you start to think, wait a minute, if my main screen is being blocked, how is someone supposed to see the shots coming from off screen when they're being blocked? Or how is a person supposed to see where a door is if the UI is completely blocking it as well? And it's just little things like this that can lead to problems. And sometimes they can be caught through playtesting. Sometimes the developer just goes on blinders mode and they just completely block everything out.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so many things like that. Like, um, I hate calling people out, so I don't want to mention any
Mm-hmm.
specific games. But I've played games like where the UI is just too small, it's too
Mm-hmm.
tiny on the screen, or where just things don't make logical sense.
Yeah.
Like I have to pick this option and then this option and then play the game, or and I played games where like menu is really cool. It's visually stunning. It's amazing. It's got like these effects on it, and the camera moves through stuff. But I don't know how the hell to use it. And a lot of stuff like that. Just like simple usability. If you just sit someone down and hand them a controller or a keyboard and
Mm-hmm.
watch what they do, a lot of that stuff can be caught really easily and really quickly.
Yeah. Renault and Chet brought up some good points about good UI. I haven't played Destiny, but I have certainly played Into the Breach and Persona 5. And those two games are really great examples of being able to show the player immediately what's happening and what are the outcomes of their actions. Because that's another big point. I mean, again, I'm going to probably keep saying this for our chat, but every topic we talk about could probably be its own podcast, or probably several
Totally.
podcasts, when it comes to what it means to get into it. But UI design, such as in Into the Breach. I know they've posted several pieces on Gamma Sutra already about trying to cut down on any kind of visual annoyances that gets in the way of showing the player, okay, the guy's going to attack here, he's going to move here, this is going to get hurt here, and you're going to have to process that. Hey Mike, thanks for coming on. We've been listing tips, I think, in chat already, but I'm sure there's plenty more to come. But
Yeah, I don't know if it was a Gamma Sutra post or what. I saw it somewhere on the internet, but I guess the developers, it was very technically complex for them to make the UI that they made for Into the
oh yeah.
Breach. It was not easy. They had to go through a lot of hoops to use all the different, show all the different moves and enemies and possible stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
they did it because they understood the importance of it.
Yeah.
And a game with a bad UI, the UI can literally get in the way of the game and
Yeah.
stop people from enjoying it.
Yeah. And I think you just said something really important there, Tim, that a good UI, it looks simple. When you see something like the UI from Shovel Knight or Into the Breach, or even something like Persona 5, while it is visually distinctive, it looks very simple. That's the point. I don't even want to think how many iterations they came up with in terms of growing that UI from what they originally had, because they've said, and I think in interviews, that Into the Breach was going to be a lot more complicated. There's going to be a lot more interactions between the mechanics, a lot more things to display, and they just said, you know what? This is just going to make this game too damn confusing. Let's cut it all out.
Yeah. Well, and I think they were smart in the fact that they most designers UI is an afterthought. Most developers, I should
Mm-hmm.
say, most game developers, UI is like an afterthought. They want to make the game and then they throw the menu together or the UI together just to kind of like, get the game out there. But they understood the importance of it and they understood simplicity of how the game had to appear for people to be able to get into it,
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of stuff can block people from
Mm-hmm.
getting into it. When I see streams of like World of Warcraft and I see 18 million windows open, I'm like, dude, I don't even want to I
No.
don't want to go near that game.
No.
Like
Mm-mm.
um, Dwarf Fortress, same thing. I tried, man. It's just I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's too crazy.
And
But Into the Breach actually looks simple. I watched it on Twitch and I've never played it, but like, oh, okay, I get it. He can move there. This guy can do that. Like, makes
mm,
sense.
yeah, and that kind of, putting it off kind of thing, that's another major trap designers fall into, and it's the dangers of just listening to your hardcore fans. Because the people who have been with you for months and years at a time, they figure out all the complexities of your game. And it's very easy to just forget what someone brand new is looking at when they're playing your game for the first time. And I think that's where a lot of developers tend to struggle. Because you've built your game over how many months or years, you know how it all works. Why should you change it when you know from beginning to end what everything does? But
Yeah.
again, it's just something that can come back to bite you in the worst way.
Well, yeah, a lot of especially developers that don't get a lot of feedback and don't show a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people a lot of stuff. It's very easy for them to think what they have is simple because it's simple to them. What they don't
Mm-hmm.
realize is they've designed it. It's kind of like puzzle games where if I'm a designer and I design a puzzle, the puzzle's always going to be easy for
Mm-hmm.
me. I know the solution. I know exactly how to do it. I designed it.
Yeah.
Whereas you cannot tell the difficulty of a puzzle by designing it without having someone play it.
Yeah.
So I think UI is like the same thing. You have to have someone that has no context
Mm-hmm.
go through your game. And I'm actually struggling with this now because I have testers for my game Philophobia, and when I make UI changes or I make structural changes to the game, I can't necessarily give all of the current testers that
Mm-hmm.
new build and ask what they think, because they already understand the game. They know the mechanics. They
Yeah.
know how to play it. They know how it works. I have to get a new impression. So I
Mm-hmm.
constantly have to find new people to
Yeah.
show certain things like UI to. to kind of get the first impression, and it's really important.
Hmm. And we got a really interesting question in chat. I'm going to scroll up for a second. Small Boss asked a few minutes ago, do you think UI can be used to tell a story? And I would say yes, it can be. I've seen uses of integrated UIs where the UI of the character is basically built into the game space or onto that person. Probably the most famous example would be Dead Space, where
Yeah,
Isaac's
that's
suit
great.
is literally your UI. You see the little spine on his back, which I know I'm pointing to my back right now, like everyone can see it, but you can see your health on your back. When you pull up your gun, you get the little holographic display of the ammo. So you can use
Yeah,
UI like that. Even something in Resident Evil 7, for instance, with having the character have to actually, pour, the spray or the drink or whatever that stuff is on his hand to heal it, or looking at his gun like, in Condemned. So you can use the UI to either tell the story or even just tell the personality of the character. But that is definitely more on the advanced side of things. I'm sure not too many developers out there can do it very easily.
the Division does a good job of that too for some of their UI stuff. I would say too, like one of the things I try to do with my game at Phobia, and the game has gotten more complex, so this may change, but I tried to in the game there are like collectibles that you can collect. Like you need a key to open a door. You need
Mm-hmm.
a heart fragment for like the collectible of the level and stuff like that. And I tried really, really hard to make the game while you're playing it have no UI. And so I did things like I would make the player carry the key
Mm-hmm.
while he was running. I would make the little, when you collect the heart collectible, I would make it beat on his chest. So creatively, you can create things like to that have the same function as a UI, right? They deliver the same information, but they can be part of the living world. And sometimes those make sense. Like obviously you have to think about the type of game you have, but for my game, the character carrying a little key over his head,
Mm-hmm.
I think was more immersive and more effective than showing key plus one,
Mm-hmm.
in text in the top right. And it looked better too.
Yeah.
So it's definitely possible.
Yeah, but you can even do simple things like we see in ARPGs where the UI or character will change based on what gear they're wearing or what skills
Yeah.
they're using. Um, I know Diablo does this very heavily with Blizzard and Diablo 3 that each class has like slightly different UI at the bottom of the screen to represent their different health and their different special resource. And again, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, it sounds simple. Again, like Diablo 3's UI, it's not that complicated to look at. But again, it takes a lot of time and a lot of iteration in terms of what is someone looking at. Like, for instance, as a
Yeah.
really quick example, what you're watching right now, you're probably focusing on me because I'm moving and I'm talking around, so that's where the focus is on. But let's say I have like a little counter like right up there. Are you going to be paying attention to that while you're focusing on me? And UI placement is very tricky. As I mentioned earlier with that game, you can't just have elements all random. As a quick example, when we played the game Attack of the Earthlings, that was last month, I believe, the game features like a resource counter. It's just like hanging in the upper right hand corner, just floating in the ether. Like it's not attached to anything, there's no border around, it's just like literally there. And excuse me, unless you already know it's there, you're paying attention, you may not even realize there's that counter there, much less when you're in the heat of battle.
Yeah, this comes up a lot in my Feedback Friday streams
Mm-hmm.
because there are a lot of games that I play that have UI that tell me what I need to do, but I don't see it. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody in stream is like, Tim, it's there. Tim, it's there. It's right there. How do you
Mm-hmm.
not see it? And I'm like, I didn't see it,
I'm looking at,
And you have to
mm-hmm.
the feedback here is not that all of the people in chat should yell at the streamer where it
Mm-hmm.
is. The feedback here is that something probably needs to change because I didn't see it, or I didn't pay attention, or I didn't think it was important,
Mm-hmm.
or the visual elements in the game hold my attention more than the UI did,
Mm-hmm.
or something is off. And not saying that like my experience applies to everybody, but just as general feedback, like there's a lot of stuff that I don't pay attention to. There's a
Yep.
lot of like,
Oh yeah.
you know and most people don't pay attention to. So to get them to pay attention to it is really important, and that's where like I think feedback in games, a lot of people struggle with that, like
Mm-hmm.
putting UI elements on feedback, like flashing red or stuff that kind of lets the player know they got hit. Because there's a lot of games that I play too that like I have no indication of how well I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
or if I'm dying, or what's going on, and
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things that like can really make a game frustrating if you don't see it, even if it's there, if it's not readable or understandable,
Mm-hmm.
it's just as bad as not being there.
Yeah. And again, a lot of first-time developers certainly struggle with when it comes to making that UI pop when it needs to be, and then kind of fade in the background when you don't. Because you don't want the player to be trying to focus on the main screen and have 15 different lights and flashing indications going all over your screen. And I would say a very important tip for first-time developers is when it comes to the UI, you definitely want to keep it on the simple side. You don't want to be reinventing the wheel when it comes to a control scheme or UI, not when people have figured out the easiest ways of doing it. I always equate this to cars. No one's going to think they're clever by putting the steering wheel, on the glove box and your pedals on the right on the other seat. Yes, that is creative, but everyone has gotten used to that standard. So use that as kind of a guide for your own game.
Totally. And sometimes the usability is more important than innovation.
Mm-hmm.
People forget that.
Yeah.
If someone were to come out with a different drive system that might be better for a car, it would likely slow down its adoption rate.
Of course.
Like less people would buy the car because of the learning required to
Mm-hmm.
actually get it. And I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm sure it could be done, but it'd take a lot more effort than just putting a steering wheel in the car. And the same thing goes with games, like and the controls as well. Like if I've seen people pick just random
Mm-hmm.
buttons for. I played a game with U, H, J, and K as the movement, and I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
why?
Yeah, there's a pro tip. All you would-be developers watching this, either live or recorded, do not use keys like ampersand, question mark, or screen lock as vital keys for your video game. Just don't do that. And two really good points came in chat. Jason Kennedy said, "Have your UI checked for colorblind friendliness. That's a major part
That's good.
of accessibility. Accessibility, as
Totally.
we talked about, I spoke with accessibility expert Ian Hamilton a few weeks ago. That cast will be going up in record form probably before this one. And we spoke about how there's a lot out there when it comes to making your game accessible like that. And again, it's those things that you don't really think about, but somewhere there's someone who maybe has trouble struggling with color blindness, or someone who has arthritis and can't do
Yeah.
rapid fire pushing like that. And
And that kind of stuff is not an inconvenience to them.
no.
If they're colorblind and your UI uses some colors that they can't see, that makes the game inaccessible. Like they can't play it at all. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely something to take into consideration.
Yeah. And Mike said something I want to point out. UI is boring as I don't curse, so we'll just leave it as that. But that's a really good point for a lot of consumers and for a lot of people as well. As we've said earlier in this chat, UI design, when it works, is simple. I've said this many times over, but nobody is going to spend a video on YouTube or writing a review and praise a game for a amazing UI that I understood. They're going to spend that time screaming at the developer saying, I can't figure out what's going on the screen. What do all these icons mean? The developer is an idiot and 1 out of 10. And it goes back once again to feedback. You are not going to be getting a lot of constructive feedback from reviewers at that state of the game. They're going to comment on what they're seeing, not what can be. And that's why you need to
Yeah.
get that playtesting going. Because if a reviewer finds your game hard to follow and can't understand what's going on the screen, I am sure if you put your game in front of a brand new playtester, they're going to see it almost immediately.
And if they don't notice it, you'll notice them
Mm-hmm.
doing something weird or looking for how to do something,
Yeah.
or like you can, by watching them play, you'll be able to see it. I think I think the problem with a lot of developers is they think of themselves as game developers and they want to make the game. And because they put so much importance and focus on the game, they forget about the experience, the overall experience, the
Hmm.
menu systems, the UI, the boot up screen,
The
how long it takes to
tutorial.
load, like yeah, tutorial, all
Hmm.
everything that makes the game from the time they double click it on the desktop to the time that they're actually finish it. Like that stuff is really important. And when you think about the fact that like most people never finish your game, like something like 70-80% of people will never finish your game. And the average playtime for newer games is like 10 to 20 minutes sometimes. So when
Hmm.
you think about that, and you think if most people are only going to play the first 20 minutes of your game, you really, really double down on all those little experiences, especially like loading screen is going to take a minute. They're going to be on the menu for 30
Hmm.
seconds. They're going to look at the UI initially. They're going to make a judgment call based on your game. Like so many things in that first 10 minutes
Yeah.
is going through their brain. And that's where the focus needs to be. Not, the game is still important, but like that whole piece determines whether or not they continue playing, whether they have a
Hmm.
positive experience or a negative experience or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think a really good point there, and this is another big tip that if you haven't heard this one yet, I will actually be surprised if the audience hasn't, but that the first level of your game should be the last one that gets designed. And I'm not the one to have came up with that one. That is a famous quote. I forget. I'm not sure that's a Shigeru Miyamoto quote, but I know that's a very popular one that people mention. But it is very apt in this situation. That
Totally.
again,
I think you learn a lot. Like it's the most important, but I also think like as you're pushing out all the content, you learn all the little pieces of what you're building. You really get intimate with your building blocks of your levels, your enemy types, and how it all works. And you need clarity for
hmm
that. And so, you definitely can't just throw that together. And I think you should take the time, extra time to really think about how that works.
yeah. And a lot of good points in chat about tutorial design. But one I want to bring up, Dylan Hansen just said, is it okay to have your controls be ESDF and IJKL? Because that's where you put your left pointer finger on F, your right pointer finger on J. That's where the bumps are, and it really depends on the kind of game you're trying to make. For instance, this actually goes back to what we were just saying in terms of that kind of playability. I've played games where they want me to use my left hand on WSAD, my right hand's on the mouse, but then you have critical commands on I, L, O, and P. Now, if my hands are separated that far, how am I supposed to hit those keys comfortably? But but here's the other trick. You could then say, well, let me move all those commands closer to WSAD. Then you run the issue of all those keys basically overloading your one hand, and it's very easy to slip up and hit the wrong one. Like I've played, for instance, in Payday 2, they put I remember at one point they put the melee key next to the grenade key, which is really great when you're in a stealth mission and you accidentally hit the key to throw an explosive grenade in the middle of a crowd when you're just trying to karate chop a guy in the back. And again, it can be very weird when you start having these commands interact like that. And
Yeah. So I think because a lot of people in the chat are mentioning stuff, are certain controls okay? I think your controls they don't have to be WASD. Like you
mm-hmm,
don't have to stick to the norm. But I'm saying like people expect that.
yeah,
So if you just controls are the one barrier between the player and the game. So if you just stick to existing controls, how is that harming you? Like that's not a place that you really need to innovate unless your game requires it. If your
yeah,
game requires like 20 different keys, then yeah, you're probably gonna have to look into more
mm-hmm,
complex control schemes. But
mm-hmm,
I would also argue that you probably need to look
mm-hmm,
at the complexity of your game at that point, maybe
yeah,
figure out how to tone it down a little bit. But I don't think there's a right way to do controls. I just think that if the player doesn't have to think about them, that's one less thing you have to worry about.
yeah,
And I would definitely get in front of people as soon as possible to
yeah,
understand things like that. Like the grenade thing is something that's probably you watch 10 people play it, that's going to
mm-hmm,
come up. That's going
yeah,
to happen, right? So you're going to be able to fix that.
yeah,
That's all you needed to do is just watch 10 people play it. So
mm-hmm.
feedback is important.
And just to clarify a point that Small asked a few minutes ago regarding the first level being designed last, what we mean is in terms of finishing the levels. Obviously, your first level is going to be the first thing you actually build, but in terms of you actually finishing your levels and putting them in game, the first level of your game should be the last one at that point. It should be finished once you know exactly what your core gameplay loop is, what your progression system is, and again, exactly what someone is going to be playing your game about.
Totally.
I can't even pronounce that and mouse. Let's see. I just saw something else. What was it? But yeah, getting back to controls, as you just said, Tim, again, this is where it's very important to be looking at other games and looking at what has kind of become standardized. Another thing that drives me nuts is when developers just blanket their keyboard with commands instead of trying to use context sensitive. For instance, sorry about that, but games where you have a separate like door open key and a separate pick up an object. Again, those two commands are completely binary. You're not going to be doing them both at the same time, so just tie them to the same key. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of developers, at least in the first time, tend to forget how useful context sensitive commands can be in terms of streamlining your game. You don't need 15 keys when you can tie a lot of those commands to maybe 2 or 3 keys because they're black and white or on and off kind of situations.
And I think from a developer standpoint, from someone that actually like, you know, has programmed a lot of these things, I think the pitfalls that those kind of things that they fall into those because it's easier to program
Yeah,
separate keys for separate actions. It's just easier
yeah,
to do.
of course.
So it's one of those things where I think a lot of developers, yeah, they make mistakes because it just makes it sense. It makes total sense to them. Like they can play it, they know how to play it, they know which key it is.
Hmm.
They built it. It was easier to do. They get it done. But they don't. They're not thinking about that core experience, that first person sitting down with it, trying to figure it out. It's definitely like having context sensitive keys is great. Having like an action button or something like that for
Hmm.
all the different actions, I think is a good way to go. And it because yeah, if you're using multiple keys for similar actions, there's got to be a better way to do that. I think,
Hmm.
and you want to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah. And again, getting back to like the person's hands on the keyboard, this is something that I've talked about before, but I think in the context here it makes sense. You have to understand what the neutral position is going to be for playing your game. As in, when I am holding, I'm going to pull up my gamepad here. Where I'm holding this, where are my fingers resting on this gamepad right now? Because that's where you want your primary actions to be. I've said this before, but if you're designing a first person shooter for a console, you're not going to be using down on the D pad to fire your gun because that is completely
Yeah,
unintuitive. And
totally.
it's important to understand how someone's playing your game or how they're holding the peripheral to be able to play that game. Because if I'm constantly to shift my hands onto multiple rows on the keyboard, or like for instance, when I play Dark Souls, sometimes I will do this crazy thing where I'll like switch my hands and try to control both analog sticks at the same time because I'm trying to focus on attacking and not using the auto aim. It You have to be really careful when people have to play finger twister when it comes to your
Yeah.
title.
The elite controller definitely helps with that,
Mm-hmm.
but it totally I feel like there's a lot of things where to like in addition to what you're saying, because 100% agree with you, I think there's been times where I feel like a game is designed for PC and then it's ported to console
Yeah.
or it's just adapted to a controller
Oh
and
yes.
it makes it really unintuitive to use because it's like what the hell is this? I always recommend that people start with the design for the controller if they're planning on both
Mm-hmm.
because the controller is a lot easier. A UI based on a controller is a lot easier to adapt for PC than vice
Mm-hmm.
versa.
It's also a
Um,
lot more intuitive in terms of again of how
yeah,
someone's holding it, where their fingers are going to be, and stuff like that. As an example of that kind of craziness, Tim, I don't know if you ever saw this, but did you ever had a chance to play Rainbow Six on the Sega Dreamcast?
on the Dreamcast,
Mm-hmm.
no.
That was
I,
Hellish Nightmare. That's probably a one of the punishments in hell at some point to try and play that game on a Sega Dreamcast. They just literally try to map all like, the 30 or 40 commands onto 3 different overlays. You have to hold like one button down that brings up this set of commands. You hold down another one to do this one, and it was just insane to try and do. And this was during the era before we saw the porting or the cross porting of games becoming a lot more standardized. And that's
Wow.
probably been a very big deal of the last, I would say, maybe 10, maybe a little bit more than that years. I mean, really good cases in point. We saw games like Dragon Ball Z Fighter on the PC. We're seeing the Souls games now coming out on console and PC at the same time. And again, like 15 years ago, that wasn't going to happen. And if it did happen, it would be a very lousy game. And I guess
Totally.
here's another big tip. Probably one a little too advanced maybe for our audience, but if you're going to port a game to multiple platforms that have completely different control schemes, do not skimp on that port because you do not want to release a crappy port of your game because you are losing an entirely new potential fan base. A really good point of that would be the first Injustice game and Mortal Kombat 10, and how NetherRealms kind of went cheap on that port, and it was released with a lot of technical issues. The game wasn't working for a lot of people, and they just basically killed the PC fighting game market for those respective games. And again, we don't get too many fighting games on the PC, at least not too many AAA ones. So that was a lot of wasted fan base and wasted growth there.
Yeah. I think too, like a lot of people will try and map a game or they'll try and port a game from like completely different devices, right? Like from
Mm-hmm.
a PC to a touchscreen or from a console to a touchscreen or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And at that point, a lot of times you probably are designing a slightly different game.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make it usable. Like I know I play FTL, I played it on the computer a little bit, I played it on the iPad, but like the iPad, it looks the same, it feels the same, but there are some very key UI changes that they made. Like when you tap on something, the size increases of it.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few different things like that that otherwise the game would probably be unplayable,
Yeah.
even on an iPad.
Mm-hmm.
So and not only that, but I think touchscreens are like I'm everyone in the chat that from Game Dev Underground probably knows I hate on-screen controls on a
Oh
touchscreen.
yes.
Like when someone takes like a console game or something and they port it to mobile and
Mm-hmm.
all they do is they put the
Mm-hmm.
controller on the phone, it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Like I hate that so much
I've
because I feel
recently.
like
Yep.
it should be a different game, you know?
Yeah. I've recently discovered the horror of that myself, getting a smartphone of like 4 or 5 months ago. I have giant hands, which may be maybe even more giant with the camera here. So my fingers just engulf those buttons. And also bonus points if you put those buttons so close to each other that when I push one, my finger hits the other one as well. Because I always love that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
getting back to your point, that's another very interesting topic when it comes to porting games from console or PC to mobile, or vice versa. And as you just said, I think this is another big point. You have to take those considerations into play. Because I've played games that have been ported from mobile to PC, and something always feels off. Like, again, it feels like the game was designed more around a touchscreen rather than for me to immediately point and click. Usually, these games don't feature hotkeys or an additional way to perform commands. It's usually all on screen button presses. And
Yeah.
again, it's one of those things that can kill a game, especially when you're trying to build that audience.
Totally. It's one of those things where if you don't think about and you port it without really like going through the motions of how this different platform or this different medium changes things, you can mess it up. But it's also one of those things where if you think about it ahead of time, you say, okay, this game is going to be on PC and mobile.
Mm-hmm.
There are small things that you can do that will make the game almost directly compatible across systems.
The earlier
Like
you
just
come
think
up with it, the better.
totally,
Mm-hmm.
totally. Like the more you just think about it, like you can make a UI if you can make a UI that's compatible with controllers, touchscreens, and mouse and keyboard. Like, but you just have to think through that, right? Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if you leave one of those out, if you leave, for example, you make something mouse and keyboard, that's going to be really rough to map to a controller. Like some people just like to map the mouse button to the joystick, and that's like, I
Mm-hmm.
hate that so much.
Oh
So yeah,
yes.
a little bit of thought ahead of time can get you good places.
Mm-hmm. And again, that can be very troublesome for new developers, especially first timers, by the fact that you're not thinking that far ahead because you don't know that stuff. And
Yeah.
again, there's one thing that can kill a game is there's things that you don't know that will come back to hurt you. Oh, I see. Mike has a good question, but I'll get to indies first. He asks, if your game is just made or is just suited for one specific system, should you just not port it at all? Now, that's a very interesting point. I would say that would be more relevant of a question maybe, again, like 15, 20 years ago, during, I would say maybe late 90s, early thousands, when everybody was using a completely different control scheme. Again, for I don't know if there's any young folks watching this, but there were days where every console had a completely different control scheme and a completely different gamepad design because everybody was trying
Yeah.
to be the next standard. And it made it impossible to port those games over. Because if your game requires, let's say, four face buttons and you're using like the Sega Genesis controller that only has A, B, and C, how are you going to fit that onto that one?
And back then too, the architecture was completely different. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes you had to recode the entire game. You literally had to port line by line into a different language. Nowadays, most of the engines are cross-platform by default.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just export to mobile or export to PC with one click. So the design considerations are more thinking through the possibilities rather
Mm-hmm.
than the technical, uh, you know, challenges of trying to actually port a game.
Mm-hmm.
I think whether or not you should port your game is probably a completely different
Yeah.
topic, and I'm sure we could have a whole
Mm-hmm.
discussion on that. But
Yeah.
um, like if it's suited to one system, you know, sometimes you can make it work, like reinvent it. Like I know RTSs, for example,
Mm-hmm.
they're a lot better on PC, but you know what? Halo Wars came along and
Mm-hmm.
they did a really good controller based RTS. They found a system that works. You move along with the joystick, you hit A, it opens up the circular menu, and then you use the joystick to select like one of the units. That feels really, really good. And it made an
Mm-hmm.
RTS. It's one of the best UI examples of an RTS on console. So there are different things you could do. You just got to think through it.
Yeah. And again, the fact that the game pads have become standardized over the last 10, 12 years, I would say maybe, well, I would say actually with starting with like the PlayStation 3 and then the Xbox, everybody get on the same page, maybe even earlier than that, in terms of how many buttons you want. Again, if you look at the Xbox 360 control pad, all these buttons are the same on the PlayStation. It'll feature, of course, square, X, triangle, circle, but the placements are the same. The triggers are the same. Even the Nintendo Switch, even Nintendo, as the black sheep when it comes to their crazy control schemes, has a more standardized feature for the Switch these days, and
Yeah.
it is a lot easier to do that. Now, of course, there's as another major part about porting a game. There's also the cost of it, and again, that's its own topic. But if your game is doing well enough and there is calls for it, it can't hurt to do it. I mean, Darkest Dungeon being a really great example. They've been on the PC. I think they're on Mac. They were ported to the Switch earlier this year. They just came to Xbox One, and they're already on PS4. I mean, there's a very interesting topic. This is, again, completely out of scope for our chat, but Nintendo Switch has been courting a lot of indie developers this past year. I mean, the announcement, again, for those of you watching this recorded, they did a Nintendo Direct on March 8th, and they announced Undertale is coming to the Switch, Little Nightmares. So there's definitely room, and if your game is unique enough that it can stand out, especially among a platform that may not have those games, it can certainly be worth it to explore those options.
Yeah. I would definitely look into it. And especially like, I think I wouldn't plan on building a game for the Switch and the Xbox and the PC and all that at one time.
No.
But what you see a lot of these indie developers do, especially successful ones, they'll come up with a game on PC. It does well. Then they start talking about porting it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then they would go here, then they go there, and each one they can treat as its own release cycle with its own marketing, with its own hype. They
Mm-hmm.
can build up that whole momentum again,
And again.
and they could just do it over and basically make more money, have another launch day essentially for
Mm-hmm.
a different platform. So you can definitely do that, and I wouldn't like plan on pushing, especially if it's your first game. I wouldn't plan on pushing out on more than one platform on launch day because there's a lot of little technical hurdles in that.
Mm-hmm.
Last 10% turns into last 150% when you're doing that. But it's like I said, if just a little bit of thought can kind of guide your UI design to where
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to change much. If that happens, you can just click the export button, change a few lines of code, and you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you got to probably integrate with like their APIs and stuff for different platforms, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, like it just a little bit of thought beforehand in how you design your UI can save you a ton of headache
Yeah.
down the road.
But with that said, though, I will also want to point out that you do have to be careful. Again, going from a keyboard and mouse to a gamepad, that does present very interesting constraints, especially if your game is known for using a lot of on-screen elements or a lot of hotkeys. So you do have to pay attention to that. And I am trying my damnedest right now to think of games that had to have completely redesigned UIs when they switched, and I know they're out there, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe the chat can think of these, but games that when they were ported from PC to console or console to PC, they had to be completely redesigned just due to the limitations or restraints from one of those platforms.
Oh, the only things I could think of are bad examples. I don't want to call anybody out.
And a question Mike asked a few minutes ago, always a very popular one. Is the indie apocalypse real? That's a tricky one, and I know.
Did you have a video on this?
I think I probably do. I know I spoke to Cliff Harris and Jake Brigette about it a few times in the past,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't. I want to say I don't think there is, but again, it's very hard, I think, for a lot of developers these days because a lot of people will turn to Steam as being the all-in-one, the savior of your game. But if Steam goes away or if they don't put you on your platform, what do you do? Now we've talked. I guess just to finish my thought, we have talked many times about the cream rising to the top, and all that. But it's one of those very interesting points, and I'll shut up for a second. I'll let you get your thought out, Tim.
uh, so I have a video on I actually think it's called "Is the End Apocalypse Real?" I think that's the actual title. But basically, what I'm saying is, it's games are getting easier to make, which means there's a lot more games in the market, which means by the law of averages, there's a lot more bad games in the market. It's going to be harder than ever to get above the noise because there's so much more noise, but it doesn't mean that it's not doable.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at, like, a lot of people watch Indie Game the movie, or they watch some of these people and they ask, like, yo, how were you successful? What did you do? And this guy that was successful with the game in 2010 or 2012 will say, I did this and this and this, and I got on Steam, and Steam sent me 100,000 people, and then I made $1 million and I retired.
Mm-hmm.
But then they try and do that, and they say, oh, you can't do it anymore, so it's the indie apocalypse, so nobody can do it.
Mm-hmm.
That method, they're correct. You can't do that anymore because Steam lets everybody on for $100. I can buy some models, I can buy some code, I can smash them together, pay $100 and publish it on Steam.
Yeah.
But the fact that that doesn't work anymore doesn't mean that it's no longer possible to sell a game or make a successful game. I think the methods change, and the people that do the best, the people that did the best on Steam, the people that did the best, if you look at like the golden age of indie games, like when Super Meat Boy and all those games came out, those were some of the first indie games on the Xbox marketplace. Those were some of the first heavy hitters there. They were the innovators, right? If you look at like the early days of Steam, when people were getting on Steam, they were the innovators. They were doing the new thing that nobody else did. So I think rather than looking backward and say all these methods don't work, You're right. We can go 100 things. You know what doesn't work? Blockbuster. You know what didn't work? Circuit City. You know what I mean? Like there's so many different things that just get eaten up and destroyed by new innovators like Netflix or like Best Buy or different business models. And you've got to look to the future for how you're going to sell your game and how you're going to get your
Yeah.
stuff out there. You got to look for what the next thing might be. Right now it's Nintendo Switch, right? Everybody's talking about Switch, but even now everybody's going to run to Switch. In a year from now, it's not going to be viable anymore.
Yep.
There's going to be too much stuff, and everybody's going to say, "Oh, Switch isn't viable anymore. It's the indie apocalypse," and they're going to keep doing that thing over and over again. So, like, I'm always looking forward. Like, I know there's a platform right now called Congregate. Congregate is a website for all kinds of Flash games and mobile games, and they're releasing something similar to Steam called Console with a K. I'm really looking into that platform because that platform's not even out yet. The beta's this summer, but I'm looking into possibly partnering for one of my games with that. And that's a gamble, right? That's a complete risk. That can go horribly, and I can sell 0 copies, or that might be the next best thing, and my game's on the front page of it when
Yep.
it launches, right?
Yep.
And that's a risk you got to take.
Mm-hmm.
But there's only one way to ride that wave: is be ahead of the wave. If you're after the wave, there's nothing you can do.
Yep, and again, we've seen many developers try and chase the next big thing. Again, pick a big name that's came out in the last 18 years, and there's probably 5 or 10 or probably even more imitators trying to do the same thing. World of Warcraft, Grand Theft Auto, PUBG being the latest big example of this. And you can't just chase the what's popular and expect to do as well, because I've said this before. I'm sure you probably will agree, Tim, that why should someone play your version of a great game when they can just play that great game?
Yeah.
Why should I spend money on, I don't know, some third-party knockoff of Overwatch when I got Overwatch right here being supported by Blizzard?
That's so true. And sad because I actually fell into this. Like when I played FTL, the first thing I did was like, okay, I want to make a game like FTL. I designed this whole game. It was called Black Rim. It was going to be awesome. It was going to be FTL, but better. That was my pitch, right? But I realized like I am never going to be a better FTL than FTL. There's no way. And even if by some crazy chance I do make an FTL better than FTL, people are still going to play FTL.
Yeah.
That's got the name, it's got the brand, people have been playing it for years. Like that's still going to be the game, right? They're not going to switch to mine because it's a better FTL. FTL, I can never out FTL FTL.
You can
So,
only do something better or different than that.
yeah. And so the games that take off, the games that do well, are the games that are not trying to copy anyone else. They're not trying to say, I want to make a better version of what that guy did. They're trying to do something new. They're pulling from somewhere else. They're pulling from somewhere different. A lot of the greatest games, I think, pull inspiration from outside of gaming. They pull inspiration from books or from movies or from personal experiences. They pull
Oh,
from
yeah.
things that aren't necessarily games, because once you end up in that loop of like copying a game, you're never going to be any better than that person. Like, it's funny because like this works in so many different things with life too, because I've actually seen people copy some of my content or copy some of the stuff that I put out, or I've seen people copy some of my marketing for like previous companies and stuff. And like every time I see that, I'm like, well, yeah, it annoys me a little bit. Like, whatever, copy my stuff, whatever. But like they're always a step behind me. Always, if they're copying me, right?
Yeah.
They're always going to be a step behind me.
Yeah, because
There's nothing that they can do to get anywhere because I'm the one innovating. I'm the one trying things, and they're doing what I'm doing. So I'm always going to be ahead. Same thing with games. Like if you're copying someone else's game, like they're always going to be the better version. So
I'm amounted to someone trying to copy someone else's homework. Like, yes, it's going to be the same answer, but they're not going to understand why it was that answer, or they're not going to be able to understand the deeper meaning of it. And I just lost the example I was going to bring up. Oh, here it is. One of the big points, or one of the big tips about successful games, it's not just saying, I'm going to make this game, I'm going to make the next so-and-so. It's saying, I'm going to make this game that's going to use these elements, but I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to put my own spin on it. And again, if we wanted to be very nitpicky, we could probably take every video game that's came out in the last year and, play 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon and figure out, what it copied from. And I mean,
Yeah.
but there's always that X factor or that unique thing that makes these games work. Again, people look as a really we keep going back to FTL and Into the Breach, but but they're just really good examples of this. But a lot of people look at Into the Breach and they were saying it's the next Advance Wars. It may have that same look, but that is a completely different design. They may have gone with that look either for aesthetics or design reasons, but they certainly wanted to do their own unique take of it.
Yeah. And I really respect them because I had a video on my channel
Mm-hmm.
talking about sequels, and I brought up the argument like, they could have had a hit if
Mm-hmm.
they made FTL 2.
Oh yes.
They could have made $1 million, literally $1 million, if they slapped a 2 on that and added a bunch more content and a few extra guns
Mm-hmm.
and some cool stuff. Like boom, there you go, $1 million. You're good. But they decided to do something completely different, completely drastically different, something hard, something that took them years, and do that. And I really respect them. Like I don't know how I feel about the game because I haven't really had a lot of time to put on it. And from watching it, I actually don't think that it's probably my type of game. I could be
Mm-hmm.
wrong, but I really respect them doing that because that means that they're constantly ahead of whoever is out there. They're trying to do the new thing. They want to continually improve and make
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and that's cool that they haven't lost that even after their success.
Yeah, Ben, I want to actually bring up what you just said there, Tim, about FTL because there's another really good tip there. When FTL, for those of you who don't know the story, FTL was obviously a Kickstarter game, and I believe they basically got almost I think like 100% or 100 times what they were asking for, or they got a huge amount of money. And as you just said, they could have taken that extra money and completely increased the scope of their game. They could have made it completely 3D. They could have made it not just procedural, they could have made all the weapons procedural and all the ships procedural as well. They could have done who knows how much. But they stuck to what they want out of that game. And that's a very important point that you have to understand what you can make versus what you can't make. And being able
Yeah,
to understand your limitations like that is very important because it helps to keep your scope in check and make sure that your game doesn't suffer, that kitchen sink syndrome of I'm just going to make a open world procedurally generated first person PUBG strategy Minecraft game. I'll spend the next 10 years on it and it will be the best and it will beat all those games put together.
yeah. And the problem too, like I've noticed this in my development, when my game doesn't have an identity,
Mhm.
when it's not strong enough to be something that's completely my own, when it starts out like FTL but better,
Mhm.
when it starts out that way, so easy to go down the kitchen sink route.
Mhm.
So easy to say, oh yeah, well I just want to add that stuff in from that game. Oh, that's cool. I
Mhm.
want to add that in too.
I'm just going to
Like when you don't like really start with what you want to design,
Mhm.
and the FTL guys did a great example. Like they knew what they wanted to build. They had
Mhm.
most of it down. They were ready to go, and they didn't compromise on their design. And they got a lot of feedback too, saying the game was
Mhm.
way too hard, game was way too difficult. Make it easier. Make it easier. I remember,
Mhm.
and they made the game that they wanted to make. I think they listened to feedback. I'm not saying they ignored
Mhm.
feedback, but they also knew the difference between people's suggestions and people's feedback, and they
Mhm.
knew the importance of the difficulty in the game. And I think if FTL was an easy game and it was beatable, it wouldn't be nearly as replayable. The
Yep.
fact that it's so hard makes it so replayable.
Yep. And it's
I think that's common to most roguelikes.
Yep. And I think what you were getting at, and that when it comes to designing your game, you need to make sure your core gameplay loop is solid. And for those of you who don't know what that term is, the core gameplay loop is essentially the foundation of your game. This is what someone's going to be doing in your title, be it platforming, shooting, managing a ship, insert a game design here. And if that doesn't work, nothing else matters. Your game is not going to do well. When I spoke with Ernest Adams, the founder of the IGDA, and he's written several books about game design, we talked about this concept of harmonizing game design, where the best games, everything feels like it's supposed to be there. It's a well oiled machine. And
Yeah,
getting your game to that state, that is a challenge. Again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. The best stuff or the best examples of games, it looks simple, but it's anything but.
totally. And I think the that core game loop,
Hmm.
the idea of that often gets forgotten. I remember when I was a kid, um, Bungie used to release these Vidocs, they called them, where they were basically like mini 5-10 minute documentaries of them making the game or working on Halo. And I remember there was one guy, I don't, but I remember this sentence so clearly. He said, "You have to create 10 seconds of fun,
Hmm.
and then the game's job is to like repeat that 10 seconds over and over and over again." And like, I didn't really understand that at the time, but basically, like when you look at how they made Halo, they Halo was an RTS at first, right? It was supposed to be on Mac. It was going to be an RTS Mac game. Like, so they worked on it so much trying to find like what about the game made it fun? Like
Hmm.
what elements of the game worked, what didn't. And they spent a lot of time on the shooting, on the controls. The controls were crazy when Halo came out.
Oh
The
yeah.
twin stick shooter, like it was insane for a console to do that.
Yeah.
But they spent a lot of time working on that. They really iterated until they found that 10 seconds of fun, and then they built all of the content and the experiences around that. And I think that's really important because most developers don't actually figure that out. They kind of discover that. They don't
Hmm.
design it, if that makes sense. So like they make this whole game
Hmm.
and then they discover, oh well, this is like the thing that you do most of the time. And sometimes it works,
Hmm.
most of the time it doesn't. But if you know what that is early on, you can consciously design it and iterate it through a prototype, right? You make
Hmm.
a bunch of different small versions of what you're trying to build, see which one works, see which ones people play, see which ones people respond to, and then take that one and
Hmm.
use that as the base for the game. I think that's a better way to go than, figuring out like like me, of course, doing what I do in my games, figuring out that the game is not working halfway through building all of the
Yep.
levels and then realizing that I have to change something like a jump or a movement, and then
Everything
all of the
breaks, and
levels,
yeah.
yeah, all of the levels get broken.
Yep. And
So,
again, that goes back to what we were saying earlier when it comes to playtesting. You want to get as many eyes on your game as possible to figure
yeah,
out what people are enjoying. I know there's another very popular statement that a lot of game developers hate to use the word fun because it's such a it's all encompassing topic. It doesn't really tell you anything, but it's just very hard to figure out why are people playing my video game and how do I, take that little thing and grow it from there. And as you
yeah,
said, the one thing you don't want to happen is spend 2-3 years of your life working on a game. You give it to people and they'll say, "I hate your game." You're like, it would have been nice to have known that, on your very first, alpha of
yeah,
your title. But again, it's just very hard to figure that out sometimes, especially when we start talking about complicated games. I mean, we were talking about this after our chat. I'm sure you folks watching this as well know about, some of the massively complicated games out there. Stuff like Dark Souls or Crusader Kings or games where it's not just 5 to 10 seconds and you figure your whole game out. These are games that can take hours before someone, that little light bulb goes over their head and they figure things out for themselves. But getting to the point where these games are enjoyable can be very hard. And
yeah,
again, another big topic that I've talked about, we could easily spend another hour on, again, is designing a difficult game. You mentioned FTL being a really great example. How do you know when your hard game is working? Because as you said, they could have changed and made it a lot easier, but then that would have changed the nature of that game.
I don't think that there's a right answer to that.
Hmm.
I think you have to keep it entertaining, and I would make it as difficult as you can. Well, this is more of like a personal than, so I just the disclaimer there. It's more of a
Hmm.
personal thing than an actual design decision. But I think you want to watch what players do, right? And I think if your game's hard, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if it's frustrating, that's
Hmm.
very bad. So in my game, for example, I have this mechanic where shadows are they move around and they basically it's a platformer side scroller, but it only shows you the line of sight of the character. So sometimes when you're moving, it looks like the actual
Mm-hmm.
blocks of the level are moving. And I paired that in my all my genius with precision platforming. And so people would try and they jump onto different blocks trying to be super precise, but then it would look like the blocks were moving, and it was frustrating. It wasn't hard, it was frustrating because they felt like it wasn't their fault when they were dying. They felt like the game just didn't look right. It was moving, it was tricking them. And as a result, the frustration made them want to quit in the early versions of the game.
Yep.
Um, I love my testers to death because I had some of them spend 40 plus minutes on a level that was designed to take 2 minutes. Uh, and that was horrible to watch. But like, I get it. Like, watching that made me realize that, okay, this is not the right kind of difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
This is the frustration difficulty.
Yep.
This is the bad kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas if Spelunky is a perfect example of, I think, a good kind of difficulty where the game is really hard. You play through it, stuff happens, everything kind of interacts with each other. It's fun, but when you die, it's like you want to play again. You want to
Mm-hmm.
restart. You want to try harder next time
You
because
know it was
that
your fault why you
yes,
lost, not the game not showing you something
exactly.
properly on screen or the controls feeling weird. Like I just played a platform. I'm not going to name it just yet because I haven't put up the spotlight yet. But the sensitivity of the jump button is so extreme that even like a light tap is being registered as like a super high jump for me. And in those cases, if you're trying to make a low jump to avoid spikes, you're going to get killed. And in those cases, that was not my fault. Like I pushed the button exactly how I wanted to, and the game wasn't properly reading that. And again, it
Yeah,
goes back to usability and playability. If someone is fighting your game, they're not going to be enjoying it. And it's when difficulty
totally.
gets very frustrating. And difficulty design, that is one of my bread and butter topics. So if I'm not careful, we'll spend the next 2.5 hours talking about. So um, let's get to some of the questions in chat because there's been a few. Let me scroll for a second. Chat moves so fast. There we go. Rex T Gunn asked, this was who knows how many hours ago when we started this, but how do you
Rex, we're ignoring you.
how do you implement narrative into a gameplay based game? So that is a very tricky topic there because for a lot of people, especially we saw out of the independent scene these last few years, they view narrative and gameplay as two separate entities. It's
Yeah,
where this whole idea of the quote unquote walking simulators have come from, or visual novel style games. And it can be tough to create a story that is also done in gameplay. For my fans watching this, we just did a video, I did one about environmental storytelling. And that's a really good element of that, of being able to work what's going on screen into the gameplay itself. It's about, I see it as trying to make the game space as lived in as possible. Because when you start to think about this game as a not a real world or our world, but a believable one, it can start to help frame how things work. Like how do
yeah,
doors work or how do keys work in this setting, and then we build it like that. But
totally.
what do you
And
think about
to
that?
add on to that, I would say another thing that you could do to kind of integrate the two, like in movies and film, there's an adage where it says show don't tell,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you should show stuff, not tell them. Don't say this person died, show them dying or whatever. But I think in games it can go a step further. I think that still applies for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you should do, not show. And what a lot of games do is they'll stop you from playing. They'll put up a cutscene that you have to sit passively and watch like a movie, and then you go back to playing. Whereas like some games that really are good storytelling have you do the thing, and you get the story from doing the thing. Like I'm gonna spoil Halo Reach here. Hopefully you guys have played it because it's like 15 years old now. But at the end of Halo Reach, they could have shown a cutscene that would show the main player dying.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They could have shown that okay, all of the Noble Squad ends up dead, and this whole planet's dead, and boom. What they did instead
Mm-hmm.
is they gave the player a gun, they put him in this level, and enemies keep coming until you die. And enemies just keep shooting you until you die. That's the end of the game. So they made you actually go through that, and they put some sad music, and they like showed your whole team was dead already. It was just you. You had to fight through that, and like you kept shooting until you died, and that was the end of the game. And that was so powerful, man. Like being in that trench, knowing that my whole squad was dead, having to survive, that was so much more powerful than some cutscene showing me that my
Mm-hmm.
dude died, right? So I think integrating and actually making the player do the thing makes it more memorable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something about, as Rex commented there, you do have, it's about integrating what your plot is into the gameplay itself. And you have to be careful because when you start having that clash, it's what we've talked about before with ludonarrative dissonance. Like one of my favorites, of course, from Outlast, that I am running past dozens of cleavers and swords and machetes and you name it all over the place. But I can't just pick up one and throw it at the guy who's chasing me. And
Yeah.
you have to be, and that's where that kind of conflict comes in between story and design. As I said earlier, Resident Evil 7 and even something like, and of course like Prey 2017 are really good examples of that kind of environmental storytelling of how, this world feels like a real place, and you start to build the map of this place as you explore it. It's not like every room is just like copy paste of the one before it. They are unique game spaces with their own unique little tells. But
Yeah.
that is a very, again, that's a very complicated topic. That let me do a quick time check here. We are about an hour and 20 into our talk. It feels like we just started, and we these talks just never end up being on the short side. But I would
It's all good,
say,
man. I'm good to go if you are.
yeah, I would say we'll go maybe another 20, 30 minutes. If we do somehow hit 2 hours in, I think that will be our official cutoff point. But we'll see what
Sounds
happens.
good.
But let me scroll back up, see if there are any other questions asked here. Okay, there's Rex. Indie Development Labs asks, how do you make your game uncopyable? And I think it was also answered after that, it's impossible. And I think I would agree with that. What do you say, Tim?
So I don't. The, if your game doesn't have a soul,
Mm-hmm.
it's completely copyable, and I see this a lot in the mobile market.
Yeah.
Someone put out a game that is just super simple to make, super simple graphics, minimalistic style. It does well. Then 100 people clone it, make the same exact game,
Flappy
throw it up on the
Birds.
App Store, and that's how it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if your game goes beyond that, if your game is a piece of you, it's not copyable. If you're doing something unique, the mechanics can be copied, the story can be copied. But again, if they're like we talked about earlier, if they are copying those things, they're a step behind you, right? You are doing the innovating, you're doing the creating. Like for me, I have a game called Philophobia. That word means the fear of love. It's about a dude who commits suicide when his girlfriend breaks up with him, and he's haunted by heart creatures, right? Like that. It's so specific to me. This story is so deep. This story was like spawned by like a breakup that I had. I have such like I married this like thought of this horrible breakup and this horrible experience with like my weird messed up brain and how I think about religion, and I like combine the two and to create these demonic hearts that like eat people. And like I've written an entire Bible based on what it would be like if love was hell. Like that's not copyable
That's
stuff,
not
right?
something people are going to be stealing from you in the near
Yeah,
future.
and they can, again, if they try and copy it, they're going to copy the thing that I ended up with, the thing that I created, right? They're not going to copy the heart and soul and all of the effort and the emotion that goes into that game. All of like the like that I've literally cried when I've read some of the stuff that I've written. They're not going to be able to copy that. They're never going to be able to touch that. So like if you are creating a game with a piece of you in it, it's not copyable at all. And if they copy it, they're going to copy the surface level things that are not what make the game. So I would say, use it as art, man.
Hmm.
push your inner self into that game as much as possible,
Hmm.
and I think that makes you immune to anything like that.
Yeah. And I think a really good point that you said, Tim, and one we've talked about before, is that individual mechanics, they are copyable. You know, the act of jumping. How do I shoot someone in a first-person shooter? Even something like putting blocks on top of each other to build a house. Those elements are unique, but it's how you as a designer put your own spin on that it creates that unique brand, that unique identifier. Again, there
Yeah.
are at this point there must be thousands of platformers that have been released on all the platforms over the years. But there's only one Mario. There's only one Sonic, Crash Bandicoot. So yes, while they all involve moving and jumping, they all have their own unique takes on it. And
Yeah.
it's a very that also really leads to a major talk about fair use, but I already did that this Sunday, and if we do that, that's just way too much time to go into. But again, the point is what makes your game unique. That should be your selling point. Because again, if it's one of the beauties about the game industry is that most video games are excuse me, are not in direct competition with each other. Meaning, I play one platform, I'm not going to never play another platform ever again because I'm looking for those unique elements. Earlier in the chat, we talked about Persona 5, for instance. Persona 5 is a great RPG. That doesn't mean someone's going to turn around and never play The Witcher 3 or Divinity Original Sins or name
Yeah.
a JRPG. But each game does something unique and different with their design. But figuring out
If
what
they
that
don't, they get
is.
forgotten. They get lost.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a reason why I still love The World Ends With You for Nintendo DS. Or I still remember the game Nights in the Nightmare, an
Yeah.
insane game by Atlas. Now, of course, with that said, the games we were talking about, some of them were probably most of them weren't massive commercial successes. And I think that's one of the very scary parts about game development. And I believe Mike asked this earlier. Where was it? Yeah, this is the first time my chat is going so fast, so it's great to have all these people on there. But Mike was saying, we think of encouraging people into an industry that has a very low chance of financial success. And that is one of the scary parts about game development. And this is actually from I gave a presentation about this to children and parents who are interested about the game industry. And I said, even if you do everything right, that doesn't guarantee success in this industry because everybody is
I
trying
agree.
to do something right.
But you know what, too, man? That's true with business.
Hmm.
You can do everything right and be at the wrong time or in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And just 90% of companies fail in their first 5 years. And another 90% of those fail in the next 5 years.
Hmm.
90%. So like nothing is for sure. Nothing is going to happen. And I've started 6 companies. 5 of them were horrible failures. I lost money at one of them. I sold, and I made money. And it's one of those things like people look at games and they say, "Oh, games are so risky," and games are risky. They
Hmm.
absolutely are risky, but so are businesses. So is any kind of entrepreneurship ever. And I think the difference between how I approach it and most people approach it is I'm not leaving this to chance,
Hmm.
man. I'm not gonna just push my game out there and cross my fingers and say,
You're.
"Oh, I hope I do well." That was never my plan from the beginning. Like everything with Game Dev Underground, everything with my personal brand, all of my speaking, all of my email lists, all of my Discord chat, all of my testers, I have thousands of people all over the internet that know who I am now. I
Hmm.
have spent the last year networking and meeting people and building stuff. The business that I'm building is not up to chance. It's
Hmm.
up to my work.
Yeah.
It's up to the work that I put into it. I'm not going to take a risk. I'm not going to throw stuff out there and hope it succeeds. I'm going to
Yeah.
make it succeed, and I'm going to keep at it till it succeeds. So encouraging people to get into a risky industry, I'm not encouraging them. I think they have to be prepared for the risk.
Hmm.
Any kind of entrepreneurship ever is going to require a ton of risk. I have spent days where I lived in tents. I have been
Hmm.
nearly homeless. I have lived in my car You know, like I've been so broke I had to choose between feeding me or my dog.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to go out and do this stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
it's if you want the results that you can get from something like this, you have to be prepared from the downside that can come with it.
Yep.
So
And
it's risky, but
yeah.
got to take it.
And talking about mitigating those risks, I think that kind of work about what to do when setting yourself up, that I think will probably be the final part of our topic for tonight. So I don't want to talk about just at this moment, but keep that in the back of your minds, everyone, because we'll be coming back to that one in a few minutes. But I'm sorry, Mike also asked you, Tim, how long have you actually spent working on games so far?
Oh, I have no idea. Um, I've built 15 games so far. 12 of them were in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as time goes, I've been in game development since I was probably 12 or 13, so close to 15 years. But there was a big chunk of time in there where I uh, did not work on games. Like I always thought about games. I always like had books full of stuff. I always had ideas. Evernote was full of ideas. But I would say probably 4 or 5 years really focused on game design, maybe. And the last 6 months has been I've been pretty much full time on game dev underground and game development, just
Mm-hmm.
straight up. Uh, so I don't know if that I don't know how to like say X amount of hours or anything. That's what I got.
Let's see. Dylan asked us earlier about if there are so many first person shooters, how do you do something that makes it not feel just like all the rest? And I think that's a really good point because there are bread and butter genres when it comes to the game industry. Again, platformers, RPGs, shooters, of course. These are genres that have been, their design, their UI, they have all been refined to a T. And it can be very hard to do that. But again, I think it has to come back to trying to figure out what your X factor is or what your core gameplay loop does that could be a little bit different from everybody else. For instance, you could have procedurally generated guns like Muller Gunship is going to do. You could have roguelike elements like Immortal Redneck. Again, there's a lot out there, and sometimes you could even take from other markets and genres. I mean, you could make a first person, I don't know, city builder or first person town constructor. I mean, that could be something similar to Minecraft. But the point is, you have to figure out your game's core gameplay loop. And if you can't do that, you really just don't have a game. And Renault actually just said a really good point there about Superhot. Going back to what we were saying with trying to figure out what game works, Superhot came from a game jam. Famously enough, they said that they made it as a game jam. People really liked it. Everyone responded to it, and they go, "Well, nobody made this game yet. Let's go make it."
Yeah.
And sometimes,
Binding of Isaac was a game jam too.
yeah. And Binding of Isaac, again, another game that has that unique gameplay loop, but has that unique personality of the craziness that Emmett McMillan put in terms of religious allegories. Again, that is not a game that you would see Nintendo or Microsoft try to pitch to the mainstream. And it's one of the
Yeah.
beauties of indie game development. I can't say this enough, but indie game developers, they make the games they want to see out there. And if they weren't going to do it, these games weren't going to be made.
Well, and I think that uniqueness, that thing that makes your game
Mm-hmm.
is often easier discovered than designed.
Yeah.
And I say that because like I've made 15 games, 12 in the last year. I made maybe 100, 200 prototypes. Um, and Philophobia was the one out of all of those where I
Mm-hmm.
felt like, you know what? This is different.
It
This,
spoke to you essentially.
yeah, it just I feel it. It's different than all these other games. I just feel that this is different. And it took 200 prototypes, 15
Mm-hmm.
games, right? To be able to get to that point where I feel it. And I don't know how it's going to do financially. I don't know, any of that stuff, but I know that I am going to do everything in my power to push that and make it happen because it's the one thing that seems to get better reception than all of my other stuff combined.
Yeah.
And so if you just focus on, like, I have a video about quantity over quality,
Mm-hmm.
just pushing a bunch of stuff out and discovering what works instead of designing it. I think when you do that, then you can kind of pick one and say, you know what, this worked. You know, Edmund McMillan made 40 some
Yep.
games before he made Meat Boy,
Mm-hmm.
and Meat Boy was played by like 12 million people on Congregate or Game Jolt or whatever it was. And so he approached Microsoft and he said, hey, we're going to remake this game because this game is already a proven formula. People
It
like this.
works.
And they made Super Meat Boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spelunky was the same thing. It was played by thousands of people on the internet, and they remade it into the Xbox version. So I think it's a better approach by, like, yeah, if you pick a random idea and it's inspired by Halo and you try and publish it, that's risky because that's probably a lot of bad decisions all packed in together, right? But if you do something like that, it's less risky. You're eliminating a lot of risk there.
Yeah,
You're eliminating a lot of possibility.
yeah, if you know that if I show 10 different prototypes to 100 people and 9 of those prototypes everybody hates, well, I don't need to focus on those anymore. And again, there's a lot, and we're not going to get to all of it in the next 15, 20 minutes. It's just not possible. But there are things you can do to mitigate the risks. Now, of course, with that said, the caveat is that doesn't guarantee success. But if you can mitigate them, it will make things a lot easier for you. Now, a really good point I want to bring up that Dylan asked earlier, is it good to throw away some of the game ideas you have rather than plan on making them? And I would say yes. It's very important as a game developer. You have to understand what you want to make versus what you can make. And one of the hardest things, especially in any creative industry, is being able to throw out one of your ideas. You know, we've said this before here, but game developers, like artists, like chefs, like directors, you name it, they treat their work like their own children. And how dare you criticize my idea? You don't know what I did. You know, it's this amazing thing. But sometimes you just can't fit the square peg into the round hole. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Maybe the market's changed. Maybe someone's beating you to it, or maybe this great idea just isn't coming together. And here's another big point, and Mike just beat me to it, but what you have in your head, it can be completely different from what's on the computer screen. Just because something works in your head doesn't mean it's going to be an amazing game once you start coding it. And as Mike said, implementation trumps ideas. I mean, I could sit here and name you like 10 ideas that I've written design documents for, you know, my quote unquote masterpieces. Each one's a more masterpiece than the other one. But I don't know what that's going to do on the market. I don't know if I could even create those games.
Yeah, and so many things change from when you actually put stuff in the computer too. Like, there are games that I've had where I'm like, oh, I'm jumping cavern and it works out great, but then I actually build it and the physics just don't work. For some reason my brain just had a weird expectation on physics, or there's no way to like actually make it implement. So there's a reason why I've made 15, made 200 prototypes, right? Because a lot of those ideas are bad. But I would take that a step further, and I would say a good game developer also throws out good ideas. Because it's not about the good ideas, it's about making the right game, using the right ideas for your game. There's plenty of good ideas, and sure, they might even they might make it better, but if that's going to add a year to your development time, or that's going to prevent you from getting it out, or that's going to add some technical complexity that could cause issues, is it worth it? Or is the game good enough to push out there? Is the game good enough to publish and see what people think? Like, if you reduce your scope and you push out 4 games in a year instead of 1 game in a year, could that be a better approach because one of those might work out well and sequel to that, something like that? Just kind of thinking in terms of like getting in front of people. Like, there's so many things. It's
And
just all this stuff's important.
what you just said there, Tim, about is my game good enough? Is it ready to be published? That is the great mystery of game development, especially indie game design. I talked about this before, this idea of the fast burn syndrome, of developers who will go all in on a project thinking that they are building, the next Minecraft. It's the idea, like I said, that if my game is 10 levels long and I add 20 more levels, does that make this game 2 times better?
Yeah.
Again, you just don't know. There's so much that can go into these games, and the challenge though is trying to figure out when your game is done. And again, I have spoken to many
Yeah.
developers who have had that trouble because there's always more you can do. There's always that feeling of what if I add another character here? What if I add another level or another mechanic?
Yeah. I used to think that AAA developers were like this crazy godlike creatures that designed exactly what they wanted and built the game that they wanted and pushed it out and did well and all that stuff. And I remember my first time at GDC when I talked to some of these guys. I was hanging out at the Amazon booth,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a couple developers there because they had just bought in Twitch. I think this was like 2 years ago or something. And I was talking to a couple of them, and I realized like, when we were talking about some of my favorite games that they had worked on, they're like, "No, we wanted to add this, we wanted to add that, we wanted to do this. My
Mm-hmm.
favorite thing got cut because people didn't understand it, like all this other stuff." And what I realized from that, and I have a whole video about this, that
Mm-hmm.
games are never finished. Movies are never finished. I made albums. Albums are never finished. They're just good enough to
Mm-hmm.
put out there.
They're
And you gotta stop yourself sometimes, because I know
mm-hmm.
me, I am super obsessive.
Yeah.
I will obsess for hours on the stupidest little things, and I have to stop myself and I have to say, this is good enough. I have to push it out. And that's one of the reasons why I made 12 out of my total 15 games last year,
Mm-hmm.
because last year was the first year that I feel like I finally started to get over that. I
Mm-hmm.
did this thing called Finish Friday, where every Friday for 8 weeks, I picked up an old project on my hard drive,
Mm-hmm.
and the tagline was complete it or delete it, where
Mm-hmm.
I would actually delete it if I didn't finish it live on stream and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't publish it. And that kind of helped me get over the barrier of finishing and pushing stuff out there.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, like, you people think that like these games have to be these ultimate masterpieces. Your
Mm-hmm.
masterpiece can be your 10th game or your 20th game or your 50th game. It doesn't have to be the first one.
Yeah.
And what you'll likely realize by the time that you get to the masterpiece is that even the masterpiece doesn't have to be that big or that complex. There are ways to
Mm-hmm.
simplify your ideas, bring stuff down. There are ways to make that core game loop into a smaller game. There are ways to build the game without all the content and
Mm-hmm.
figure out if it's fun, right? Figure out if it works. And it's just thinking, like, really realizing that the games are never complete. They will never ever be complete. They're
Mm-hmm.
just good enough to push out there, I think, is helpful, because people have these like
Mm-hmm.
Miyamoto quotes in their head where, like, the game should be perfect and you should spend 10 years on them to make them perfect. But a lot of those quotes were made in a different world. They
Mm-hmm.
were made when the game got shipped to a cartridge on a Nintendo Entertainment System. That was the game forever,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was a permanent game in history. That game is never going to be done. Games aren't the same way anymore. You can push something out on Steam and iterate
Mm-hmm.
on it constantly. You can
Yeah.
update it forever. Any console is internet connected. You can push patches out. You can do all that stuff. You can add new versions. You can do what Binding of Isaac does, and they come
Mm-hmm.
out with just kind of like an expansion, but kind of a new game to push on new content. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do, and just, I think, focusing on finishing is the main thing. Not so much making the perfect game,
Mm-hmm.
but finishing the game and making a good game, I think, is important.
It's about being able to figure out what the finish line is for your game. And again, every game is different in this regard. So there is no catch all, but being able to understand again when my game is ready is a very important skill. It's one that you're not going to figure out right away. And
Yeah.
again, there's technical issues, there's design issues, there's even being able to understand the marketing side. And again, marketing will be our final topic. And again, it'll be a very short one because we'll be here for another hour if it's not. But
I could
um,
talk forever on marketing, dude. I used to run a marketing company.
Let me see. What was that other question? I think indie development said. Here it is. Is 100% new bad when it comes to game design or creating a game? That is a very tricky point. Because as we've said, unique games can become brands unto themselves. Again, Darkest Dungeon may borrow elements from, Lovecraft and Gothic horror, but it's still its own unique title. And it has its own unique quirks that you won't see anywhere else. But
I don't actually believe anything is 100% new.
yeah,
I don't actually think 100% new is possible.
yeah,
Um, because it's just we're influenced by too much. Like
yeah.
just there's too much stuff in our head, and even if we think it's 100% original ideas, like I've come up with book ideas that I think are brilliant. Like I'm gonna write this book, and then I Google it, and it's already a book that exists.
Yeah,
And I'm like, okay, did I just think up the same thing that another human being did, or was I influenced by that directly, indirectly somehow on the internet? I don't know.
somewhere.
But
Yeah,
in addition to that, I think the best things are not new things. They're new takes on existing things. So if you look at outside of game development, you look at
mm-hmm,
iPod. The iPod was not the first MP3 player.
mm-hmm,
They were the first MP3 player that had a good UI and was usable by the mainstream, right? The iPhone was not the first touchscreen phone, but
mm-hmm.
all the Palm Trios and everything sucked. And they were horrible before that because they took Windows and a start button, and you had to use a little pen to press on the start button on your tiny little phone and use Windows on a phone, which didn't make any sense. So, like Darkest Dungeon, FTL, all these games, they take something that works existing and they bring a new element to it. They bring something completely new. They bring a part of the developers. They bring the emotion. They bring something
Mm-hmm.
there. And I think in order to create something new, like Crypt of the Necrodancer is a good too. Like, uh, let's smash roguelike and rhythm together and see what happens. Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
never been done before. But they iterate on two things that are proven to work, and they smash them together. I think that's a better approach. I think 100% new,
Mm-hmm.
one, is probably impossible, but two, likely you're going to get someone that creates something that's 80% of what you had,
Mm-hmm.
but makes it better, and they're going to be the ones that take off, like the iPod versus an MP3 player.
Or the other issue is you make something so unique that nobody can really get into it because they don't have a basics or the understanding to figure this game out. Because I've
Yeah.
seen many independent games where it's just this crazy mishmash of genres and UI and everything is completely unique. And I'm just staring there going, what the hell am I looking at here? How am I supposed to figure this thing out? And this
Yeah.
goes back to what we were saying before, but especially when it comes to UI and control schemes, you don't need to reinvent the wheel if the wheel has become standardized and everyone accepts it. Again, I'm not going to play a platformer that control is jump, plus is move right, and I have to press N on my keyboard in order to open up doors. It's unique, no one's done it before, but there could also be a very valid reason
Yeah.
why nobody's done it before.
Yeah. I agree. Don't do something new just for the sake of doing something
Yeah,
new,
exactly.
and
If
do it
it's
when you think it makes sense.
mm-hmm. And again, if something is accepted as a standard, understand why is a standard, and then you have to be really careful about breaking it. Like, here's a great
Yeah.
example. Here's one of my favorites. Red meaning health and blue meaning mana in RPGs. Again, it's something that we all have associated. Red being the color of blood, so we assume it's health. So, yes, you could be a outside the box thinker by making red spell casting and yellow your health, but why take that extra hurdle when you have something that's already been established?
Yeah. I agree.
All right, let me see. I know Mike is talking about marketing, and marketing is a very polarizing topic, I know, for a lot of independent developers. And gets into what I want to talk about next to begin to wrap things up. But I'm just quickly scrolling back up just to make sure there are no other questions that popped up. I also want to say I hope you guys are enjoying our chat. And I hope you come back for some of my developer live casts because it's great having so many people in the chat throwing questions besides just my regulars. It actually makes the chat hard for me to follow, and that's good for me. But I think, let's see. Well, that's a good question, Ether. What games set the standard of red, green for health and blue for mana? The first one that I go back to is Diablo, but I wonder if there is something older than that. But that's a topic, I think, for another time, because I still have to get to my regular streaming later. So we are almost at 2 hours in, so this will be our final topic then. And maybe if you're free, Tim, in the future, you can always come back on, or I can always pay a visit to your channel as well.
Yeah, dude, it'd be fun. We should do it again.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy these chats.
I know. And I do regular developer live streams as well. In fact, for those of you watching this live, I guess as a quick spoiler, I'm going to be talking to the designer of Duelist this coming Tuesday. We're going to be discussing CCG design and balance in that game. And I'm sure that's going to be like a 2 hour chat minimum, I think, at the rate that I'm going here. But let's get to our final topic. And I need to take a quick sip of water while I refresh here.
I'll do the same.
Yep, Duelist. But the final part that I want to talk about, and getting back to, I guess, the topic at hand, mistakes or common issues we see first-time developers make. And I want to talk about, or at least briefly, the soft skills of what it means to work in the game industry. So this, again, goes right up your alley, Tim, with marketing. But as I've said before, there's a lot that goes into the success of a video game beyond just the art, the programming, and the design. As we've said over this cast, the learning curve of what it means to make a video game has dramatically shortened compared to 10, 15 years ago. And it's very important to set things in motion to make your game as successful as possible. And what I mean about that, again, going back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, Tim, regarding trying to mitigate as many risks or problem areas that you have. So I want to talk about a few of mine that I see developers do, and then I'll throw over to you. But one of the big things that I see a lot of first-time developers mess up on, not having a website or having any kind of marketing plan of what it means to sell their game or get it out there. I've seen developers, and I'm not going to name names for this one, but she was a developer who posted on a Facebook group who was like, I just spent the last 2 years working on my game, it's out, and no one's buying it, and I don't know why. So I checked out her thing. The store page is like very generic. There's no real what's the term I'm thinking of? Highlight reel for what the game is. I checked her YouTube channel. It's like 5 videos with no vocals about the game. They each got maybe like 30 views. And it's like, and I don't even think she even had a website for people to go and visit their game. And it's like, how are people supposed to buy your game if they don't even know who you are? I've seen developers who don't have an actual press email. I've seen them who, again, as we said, they will wait until like 2 weeks before the game is out, and then they'll do marketing for it. And Mike has a really good point there. If it was good, it would find an audience organically. That's a very tricky argument, because I've said this before. The games that are successful, were they successful because they did marketing? Or were they so successful that the game was so good that the marketing came from that success?
The games that blew up because of the game being good are the outliers. They're the right place, right time. And I would even argue that their game was their marketing. Their game was easy to spread. Their game was easy to share. It required other players to play, all of that different stuff. But I would say a good game is not good marketing. That's something I hear all the time. Good game is good marketing. I disagree with that 100%. But I think a bad game will mess up the best marketing campaign out there. Mm-hmm. So I think a good game is like the baseline of what you need to actually market effectively. I think you need a good game, because otherwise all of your efforts are be in vain. And you know what? Coming from a marketing company, understanding how to sell
Mm-hmm.
products, if I wanted to go crazy and sell a bad game, I could, but
Mm-hmm.
that would be suicide in the game industry because nobody would ever buy a game.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody would ever like buy my sequel. Nobody would ever pick
Mm-hmm.
up another game. And every time my new game came out, the game they sold us, it was crap. It was
Mm-hmm.
horrible. So I think you need a good game. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the baseline these days, especially with all the noise, especially with all the asset flips,
Mm-hmm.
especially with all the crap that's out there. You need a good game. You absolutely do.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to do marketing. You also have to get your stuff out there. You also have to share it.
Mm-hmm.
People need to recognize it when they see it. They need to recognize your name. They need to recognize
It and
it,
I
it needs to be unique.
I think I agree with you on that, Tim. That the game has to be there has to be something there worth selling to begin with. I think this may get back to Mike's point again about if the game was good, it like the game has to be good to begin with. I think let's just stop it right there. If your game is horrible, no amount of marketing is going to fix that. And as you just said, a bad game is worse than not having a good game that sells because guess what happens? All those people are going to follow you. They're going to see the crap that you've done before and it will come back to bite you. And
Yeah.
that is that's not a pro tip, that's a mega tip right there. If you are a jerk or if you do things unethically, it will get back to you at some point. Maybe
Well,
not.
if you look on Steam,
Yeah.
you can find examples of people
Oh yeah.
that are good at marketing but bad at making games.
Mhm.
And they have overwhelmingly negative reviews. Any
Mhm.
new game that comes out gets automatically shamed because they're looked down upon. People feel
Mhm.
misled. People feel angry.
Why should
You
they
know,
trust your third game if your last game
yeah,
was horrible?
exactly. Like it's not going to happen. So
Mhm.
you're going to ruin your career by going full scale marketing in bad game. And like I said, I one of the reasons why I got out of marketing,
Mhm.
one of the reasons why I decided to sell my company was because a lot of times I had clients where they
Mhm.
would have me sell products that I didn't believe in. And
Mhm.
my job was to convince people to buy stuff that I really didn't think they should buy. And
Mhm.
so that felt bad, right? That's unethical, I think, in a way. Like I don't want to do that. I don't want to make people buy
Mhm.
bad stuff. But with developers, I think what gets in the way is not necessarily sometimes they have a bad game and they know.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's low self-esteem and they think their game is bad because they haven't shown it to enough people haven't seen it, they haven't gotten
Mhm.
feedback, like they don't know. And yeah, it's one of those things that you have to get it out there, one for feedback purposes but two for marketing purposes. Like my game Photophobia, so many people have seen it now where
Mhm.
I question myself on little decisions. I like, oh,
Mhm.
would this make sense or would this make sense or but I know every time that I'm streaming the game, everybody says, "Whoa, those shadows are cool. The shadows look really interesting. The shadows look like 3D moving platforms." That's a comment I get all the time. And I know, I don't just think, I know that that is an attractive quality of the game. And so that's what the game is based around because it's something that comes up all the time. So it's not something that should be left to guessing, right? Like the
Mhm.
unique qualities, the selling qualities, the as in marketing we call it a USP, unique selling proposition. um, I know what those are because people have told me multiple times. And if you're not getting that kind of exposure, you're not getting your stuff out there, you're not getting people to see it and getting feedback on it, you're
Mhm.
making a mistake. Because if you throw something together and you get it in front of people on launch day and nobody cares, it's going to be disheartening.
Yeah. And as you said, it can be very stressful for a developer to start to do these things because game design, at least successful game design these days, is not just about making a video game. We've talked about this before. You have to wear a lot of hats. And whenever we talk about marketing in games, I have a really good story that I always bring up. I spoke with developer Z, who runs Serenity Forge. They've been developing games and been publishing them as well. And we talked about marketing from his perspective. And as I've said, for a lot of developers, they view marketing and design as two separate entities. You're either the marketer or you're the creative artist. And when I posed that question to him, he said something that I always hold on to. And he said that there is as much art in the marketing as there is marketing in the art when it comes to video games, or just
Absolutely.
in these industries in general. Like, he understands that being a marketer doesn't mean he's selling his soul and his game's going to be horrible. But he also understands that if he doesn't get the word out about his games, nobody's going to buy them. But he still understands what makes his games unique. He understands, again, that there is a game worth selling here. And I see developers, I see this a lot on Facebook groups, who will, anytime you bring up how do I market my game or how do I make a good YouTube video, they will just go nuts about
I
that kind of thing.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that was it. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, you there? I'm sorry. I thought you were finishing a thought. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, a lot of people see marketing, like you said, as something that you do in the last 2 weeks before launch day,
Mm-hmm.
as a separate thing, as a separate department. Marketing is not a department, man. Marketing is the sum total of every action of every eyeball that has ever laid eyes on your game.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing is every piece of exposure that you have with every person. Marketing is the art and the science of understanding demand. And marketing, I actually ended up in a marketing company by accident because I wrote a piece of software. I put it out online. My software was designed to help artists get their assets in a game engine easily. Like back in the day, engines were cool. Like I had this engine that I used to make FPS games with. It was drag and drop, but getting custom models into that engine was almost impossible. So I wrote a tool that would help people do that, and I put it up on sale. Super excited, and I put it for $5, and nobody bought it. And I was like, what the, like, why didn't people buy this? What's going on? So I bought a bunch of books. I researched a bunch of marketing. I learned the difference in landing page and conversion rate and stuff. And I decided to do something crazy. I raised the price from $5 to $29. And I changed all my marketing and I relaunched.
Mm-hmm.
I said, this is a new thing. It's better, it's bigger, it's awesomer. And I started selling those things like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I made like six figures over a couple years, just
Mm-hmm.
selling tools online. And it was literally like I used to joke. I had a PayPal card, a PayPal debit card, and I used to joke that like that PayPal card never ran out of money because people would buy it for $29. It would get automatically sent to them, and it was just like no matter what I bought with the card, it didn't run out of money. It was just insane. And people don't understand the value of that, of doing that right, of executing something not on the creation side of it but on the sales side of it, right? Like having something that's buyable, that's needed, that's wanted, that's desired, that's in demand. And that is a skill that I've never forgotten. I've learned so many times over. That's why I started my marketing company, because I learned everything with that product. That's why I ended up with the clients that I ended up with. And it has taught me social skills, soft
Mm-hmm.
skills. It's allowed me to interact with people, take phone calls, really, really learn life. And because I understand demand, because I understand, okay, people like this thing, people don't like this thing, people watch this stuff, people don't watch this stuff. It helps me in everything that I do. Everything that I create is influenced by my marketing. If I think of a brilliant game idea that I don't think I can market effectively, or I don't think could be shown that it's unique and awesome,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't get made because marketing is a core part of the game from the start. That's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about Phylophobia. It's yes, it's an emotional game. Yes, it's deep and highly ingrained into who I am, but it's also a very marketable game, right? I posted the story in 2 sentences on my game. I had a rough breakup and it inspired me to make a game. Those like 8 words or whatever got me 30,000 people on the front page of Reddit to see my game, because I understand that, hey, this is a very powerful emotional story. People want more of this. People desire this. This is in demand.
Mm-hmm.
And for people to think that marketing is something you do for 2 weeks before you launch a game is just bizarre to me, because marketing needs to be ingrained in everything you do. And that's why people look at games as a risky industry, because they think that they make a game and they push it out there and then it's up to luck. for
Mm-hmm.
them their game to make it. Luck was never a factor in any of my games. Like when I'm going at it, like I'm gonna make 100% sure that what I do is gonna succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't succeed, I'm gonna try again harder. Right? Like it's not a risk to me. I'm gonna do it no matter what. It's just how long is it gonna take? The risk, right? It's gonna take a year, 5 years, whatever it takes. Most people aren't willing to put in the work.
Mm-hmm.
They're not willing to do the thing. And marketing should not be dismissed. I know I went on like a crazy tangent,
Mm-hmm.
but marketing should not be dismissed as something you do for 2 weeks before your game. Marketing is the sum total of action you have with every human being on the planet
Yeah.
when it comes to your product,
Yeah.
right? And that's how you should think about it.
Yeah, and for me, I'm bad at marketing. I've been getting better at it over the years. And a lot of it has been just talking to more people. And we had this chat the other night, Tim, about how doing this work with Game Wisdom has certainly helped when it comes to like how I approach things. Again, like 15 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I wouldn't be emailing developers. I wouldn't. The other day, I just sent like random tweets to voice actors because I want them on for a podcast. People who are celebrities. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to reach
Yeah.
out, and I wouldn't have done that before. Now, with that said, though, do I think that I've done everything perfectly? Hell no. I mean, I always get feedback from everyone about what I'm doing in terms of how I write, what's on my YouTube channel. It's why after talking to you, I did some changing up of the thumbnail art for it, try and make things more appealing. And again, a lot of this stuff really comes down to getting that feedback and understanding what works and what doesn't work, and of course, trying to push what works out more. And I
Yeah.
want to go back to a topic or a question Indy asked a few minutes ago. Where was it?
Yeah. I raged really hard for a few minutes. I went at it.
What do I do if I'm shy? That is one of the biggest points. I mean, for me, for those of you watching this right now, I don't know if I come off as this, but I was graded 10 for 10 for introverted behavior when I took a psychology test while I was learning psychology in college. And at this point, I'm having daily conversations with people. I'm talking right now to you. I have to listen to myself talk, which I hate, by the way, but I have to do it when I edit podcasts or when I'm watching myself to see how I'm going. But it just takes time. I mean, here's a great thing. When I was the talk I mentioned earlier about what to expect when getting in the game industry, there was a kid in the audience who he was there. He was with his mother, and the mother came up to me and said he liked it. He was so great, and the son he just like sat in the back. He didn't want to get up and talk to me because he was shy, and it just reminded me of myself at that age. I mean, hell, I was super introverted until probably my mid 20s. I started Game Wisdom in 2012, and it still took me some time to go that far. And now these days, I can email people like out of the blue because I said this. I forget if I said to you or someone else. I'm like, I don't care anymore. I don't feel embarrassed emailing you. At
Yeah.
this point, I'm established enough. I'm confident in my own abilities. So guess what? You're getting an email from me, and if you don't respond, I'm sending you another one. And I don't care if you get annoyed. But again, it took a lot of time to get to that point.
No, I agree, dude. I get emails and I get messages a lot, and they're like, Tim,
Mm-hmm.
you're a marketer, so you probably wouldn't understand this. I'm super shy and I don't want to talk to people, and I feel like yo, dude. First up, let me tell you a story about super shy Tim. Let me tell you about the panic attacks that I had when somebody would call me. Okay, I'm not joking. When I would get a phone call, I would have a panic attack. I would be terrified to talk to the person on the phone
Mm-hmm.
and be like, "Hi." That I would just be terrified. Writing emails was terrifying. Asking people for money for services that I knew were worth the money, I was terrified to
Mm-hmm.
do. My first in-person meeting, I showed up 2 hours early. I drove around the block like 4 times. I pulled into the parking lot. I sat in my car, super scared. My palms were sweating. I had to go in. I was so nervous I could barely talk. All
Mm-hmm.
right. I understand what that is like. I get it. But if you don't do those things, you're not going to get better at those things. And
Exactly.
what I realize about me, like introversion and the shyness and the inability to talk to people, those things are not traits of your genes. they're not things that are like born into you. They're not permanent traits. They're not like your height, right, where you can't change them. Those things are usually inexperience in those situations,
Hmm.
right?
Oh,
They're things that, like, you just don't have experience doing, and the more you do them, the better at them you get,
hmm.
right? So like I spent 2 weeks doing nothing but cold calls, calling people that hated me, calling people that were annoyed at having me talk to them and trying to sell something. And I had people like so mean to me, like
I,
say
I
say some of my worst nightmares on the phone.
I
And
worked at
I did it.
Comcast for 2 years doing customer support, so that was the
You probably had
hell
it worse than
trial
me.
right there.
Comcast, man, that's gotta
Hmm.
be. I'm not nice to my internet company because I hate my internet. I can imagine how that's gotta be. But like, yeah, like this stuff is stuff that you learn. You get better at the more you do. And I know how terrifying it is to do it because I went through all that. And an introvert, shy dude starting a marketing company seems completely impossible, but like that's what happened, and that's what gives me the insight I have into my channel. That's why I talk about all the stuff that I do,
Hmm.
because I understand why so many people don't go down that road and they don't want to interact with people. But I also understand how much that stuff has changed my life, right? Like had I not went through all those experiences, I wouldn't have been able to grow my YouTube channel. I wouldn't have been able to grow an audience like I did, right? Like all that stuff taught me so much that I'm able to like put it into videos and interact with people
Hmm.
and actually seem like I'm personable. I actually seen where people think I'm a marketer extrovert person. I'm not. I sit alone in my room. Like, I like my alone time.
Yeah.
Like it causes problems with my girlfriend sometimes because I like my alone time so much and she doesn't understand that. She just wants
Hmm.
to hang out. And I'm just like, no, I want to be alone. And
Hmm.
it's just stuff you have to work past, right? You
Yeah.
have to do it. You have to do the crazy things. You have to go do things they're scared of, and they get less scary.
Yeah. To give you an example, when I did my first actual live presentation at a library about 2 years ago, this was after I started doing the videos here on YouTube and the streams. And the whole time beforehand, I was thinking, am I going to get nervous? It's going to be weird standing in front of people. I went up there, and for an hour, I just was completely calm the entire time, all
Yeah.
thanks to being able to do this kind of stuff. And I've learned, like, after I did that, public speaking doesn't bother me. Like, it's weird, but like all this time I thought I was going to be scared and weird, and
You know what's crazy about fear is the greatest fear is usually the minute before you do the thing.
mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
That's when it's the worst, right? After you've done it, it's fine. Like right before, that's when it's the scariest.
Mm-hmm. And someone was talking about having trouble making calls. I mean, same way. And now, to give you an example, if the libraries around me aren't completely snowed in, I'm going to be giving some calls tomorrow to see if I can get in there to talk about doing my presentations. And again, 15 years ago, I would be a nervous wreck making these phone calls, but now it's just like second nature to me.
Yeah. People got to do the thing. Yeah, in the book, The 4 Hour Week, I read that a couple years ago, and Tim Ferriss recommends that you do this crazy thing where you go to a populated train station
Mm-hmm.
and you lay down on the ground. And it sounds crazy, right? You're like, oh my God, everybody's going to look at me. But I was like, all right, you know what? Tim Ferriss is rich. I'm not. Let's do this. So I tried it. I laid down in the middle of a super crazy train station. And at first, I couldn't even open my eyes because I was so scared. I was like, oh my God, everybody's looking. It's crazy. And then I like opened my eyes and I started to notice like people were glancing at me. They didn't
Yeah.
care. They're trying to get to their train. They're like, whatever this guy's doing, I don't know, psychotic breakdown or something. But like they're more worried about getting their train than they were laying on the middle of the train station. So like that taught me like it taught me to care about what people think less. It also like taught me a lot about like people are in their own worlds. And one of the things that I learned with marketing is not always trying to push my agenda or get things from people or take things from people, and more about thinking like what's inside their head,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what do they want, what can they get out of this? Like every time if I want somebody on my channel, I won't approach with, "Hey, I want you on my channel because I want free content." Like that's what I want out of it, right? I'll approach him with like, "Hey, I would love to do an interview. I would love to in, or I'd love to share your stuff, or
Hmm.
maybe I can help you get you some subscribers, or maybe I can, like what can I do for you? How can I help you
Hmm.
out? Like what can I do?" And because I'm thinking in what other people's wants and needs, it helps me connect with people better. It
Hmm.
helps me like really understand, like, okay, form better relationships, I think, because I'm not trying to take from everybody all the time. I'm trying to
Yeah.
give. People
Yep.
know that. People in my community know that, man. They know that I'm all. If someone messages me and wants feedback,
Yeah.
boom, I'm there. They want to get their game played, I'm there to play it. They want to tag me in a post, I'm
Hmm.
there. I respond to all this stuff. Like for the first 6 months of my channel, I responded to every single comment I ever got until it got literally impossible for me to do so.
Hmm.
Like, and they know that.
Yeah. I try to respond to all of them, other than the ones that just say I suck at a game or what the hell are you talking about. Those are the ones I try to ignore as best I
I,
can.
I responded. I responded to people calling me fat. I responded to everybody for the first 6 months. I straight up did it, and
Hmm.
some people, like, the ones that weren't important, they got off the channel, but the people that like
Hmm.
legit like understood that and appreciated my interaction with them, I think some of them are still here. Some of them are watching us in this chat right now because I tag them and I let them know where we're at in the internet, and
Yeah.
they follow me, and that's awesome and that's great.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, again, I like to thank every one of my followers who've been with me since the beginning, since I was on Twitch originally, and just having those people around to talk to has been amazing. I mean, I have my regulars, Mike, Ether, El Gordo. I'm sure I'll have a few more watching this when it goes up on archive form, and it's really great to have that audience. Like I said, I am horrible when it comes to the marketing side, but I would like to think that I am getting better at it. But again, it is really about getting yourself out there and understanding how to best show the stuff off. And like I was telling you this about the other night, but one of the most common things I hear from people is that they like how genuine I am when I'm talking about these topics. They
Yeah,
hear that this is not me trying to sell a product. I'm not making these videos because I want to sell you on YouTube ads. I'm here because I want to talk about game design,
right.
and I will talk about it until my voice stops. It's the same. Mike just sent me a kiss. Thank you. It's the same I hear from developers when I have them on for my podcast. They love the fact that I'm here to talk about game design because I don't care about the PR. I don't want to ask you about what your five goriest kills are in these games. I want to ask you how you built these games, and they
Right.
love that fact. And
That's what attracted me to your channel,
mm-hmm,
dude. Like if you had all this gimmicky stuff like top 10 like best games of 2018, or like,
mm-hmm,
trying to game the system or get views or
mm-hmm,
clickbait titles, it's not the same thing. Like your content's legit, it's awesome. You go in depth about design,
mm-hmm,
you talk deep about stuff, and it's really great.
mm-hmm,
That's why I love watching it. That's why I think all of my followers should see it, because
mm-hmm.
it's awesome.
Yep, and it's why I'm getting a lot more people like developers sending me press keys and checking things out on that end because I love to talk about this stuff. And again, for any developers watching this, if you're working on a game that you would like me to check out, please get in touch. Or if you would like to talk to me about design, I mean, I know we have to be over 2 hours. Yeah, we're about 2 hours and 15 minutes in. I can talk about game design until who knows when. When we talked with oh crap, I always forget his name. Developer of Brigador. What was it? Hugh Monahan, I think that's his name. Like the podcast started with it being bright and sunny out, and by the time we were done, it was dark. You could actually see the passage of time behind him as we talked. So
That's passion, man.
I know, and it really does help to do it. And I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier. If the content is good, it will help to get it sold. It will help to get it marketed. But there are always more things that you can do. There are things you can do to help improve it. Like, for instance, how I changed the thumbnail art on my channels a few days ago. How I try to make the cuts a little bit more appealing. Adding more content. So there are ways of changing how the message goes. And one of my friends, who's also named Josh, he's the one who suggested some of that stuff to me. And again, it's all about how you approach yourself. Because at the end of the day, as we've said, you go on the internet and you make a huge fuss and you're yelling and cursing and you're saying all kinds of things, people are going to remember that. And when it comes time to sell your game or put it in front of people, they will remember how you called them all those names or said that, oh, I am the greatest developer in the world and everyone sucks, or that developer wanted to send a death threat to Gabe Newell. There's one of our final pro tips for the cast tonight. Don't send death threats to Gabe Newell.
Yeah,
That's
definitely
a very
don't do that.
that's a
But
very
but the
big
yelling and cursing thing, man, I've done that on my so I can't say don't yell and curse, but I do that all the time.
I'm
But
I'm the opposite. Like when I play bad games or games that are annoying, I don't get it's like that old expression, like your mother says. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed with you. Because I do my best. I've sadly played a few games like that, and I have to hold it in. I'm like, I will not scream. I will not scream. And then when I send to the developers, like, I know you didn't like my game, but I'm glad you didn't yell and rant and rave about it. I'm like, yeah, that's just who I am. I try not to curse whenever possible, but I do allow myself the occasional one if something gets really bad.
yeah, no, totally. I think there's a running joke in Game Dev Underground that people need to make a Tim difficulty for the games because I rage, but I'm trying to give like legit feedback, and if I get frustrated by something, like I'm trying to like show them that I'm frustrated,
Hmm.
and yeah, I don't know. It's someone said be humble, it'll make you see me harder. That's really good. Like I never that my goal was never to be humble, but like one of the things that I did in the beginning of creating my channel was, hey guys, I messed a bunch of stuff up. I made a bunch of mistakes. I messed this thing up so bad, and here's why you should avoid that, right?
Hmm.
Like, and I didn't approach it from here. I'm some super successful dude, knows all the game design stuff, and here's why you should design your game like that. I approach it from like, yo, I've messed up a lot of stuff. I've done a
Hmm.
lot of stuff wrong. Here's the stuff that I learned,
Oh yeah.
and I think it worked out.
I'm the same way. I've learned from my mistakes more than my successes. And I always try to approach everything, from being humble or just being like genuine about it. Like again, I'm not going if you're watching me, I don't rant and rave. You're never going to see a video of me, trying to copy someone like Angry Joe or any of like the other big name YouTubers where they're screaming and hollering at a game. But like I said, it's always about trying to how you want to approach yourself. How do you want people to see you? And again, I think that genuineness has helped me out a lot. I know that
Totally.
and like I said, I have made a lot of mistakes. I will never lie about that. But it's what you do from those mistakes I think really helps. And like I said, I am always looking for feedback. If you have anything to say about, something I can improve on or things to change, please let me know. And like I was saying, people on my Discord and on my other thing, you can't hurt my feelings by giving me criticism. It doesn't work for me. I have super thick skin, so you're not going to make me run to my bedroom and cry for an hour by telling me that my thumbnails suck or stuff like that.
Right. That's maybe our final lesson to game
Hmm.
developers. Both of those things. One, be authentic.
Hmm.
Don't try and pretend you're some super massive company. But two, you know, take the negative feedback, man, and don't
Hmm.
cry about it. Take it, because the negative feedback, the feedback where people
Hmm.
say, "Yo, this stuff sucks. This part's horrible. Or this part's bad." That's usually the best kind of feedback.
You
And
have
like,
to. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, my experience in marketing has taught me how to sugarcoat that stuff,
Hmm.
how to make it less harsh. But at the same time, like, I give the hard feedback. I think that's why people like my feedback Fridays. I will show them my frustration. I will say, like, I don't want to play this game anymore. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying it in a bad way. I'm not saying like you're a bad developer. I'm not saying
Hmm.
I hate you. I'm saying this game doesn't make me want to play it, and that's valuable to them. You know?
Hmm. Yep. And being able to uh I'm sorry, Mike just made me laugh there. Oh yeah, they do that. We have our private Discord where we talk game design, and yet they just rip on me all the time, folks. For you new guys watching, But being able to parse the feedback that comes in is a very critical skill. Again, that's
Totally.
another major tip because you have to be able to understand that someone saying your game is amazing, that's not really feedback. That's not telling you what they like, what they don't like.
I hate when people say that. I legit hate it so much. Like I love all of my testers, especially some of you testers are in the chat. Every single one of you guys testing Phylophobia.
Mhm.
I love you so much. But when you tell me it was good, I had
All right.
fun.
You
It
know
was
what to
great.
you know what to
No,
do now,
dude,
folks.
no.
Send them all the
Yeah.
hate. Go get them. But yeah,
Tell me
like
like I hate this because it's horrible and it doesn't work. I hate the way this looks. This looks crazy. That's the feedback I want because that's the feedback that's valuable.
the Discord channel for anyone who's interested. It's a private one. Basically, as long as you donate $1 or more to my Patreon, you'll get full access to it, as well as get access to when we do voting for games I play on Saturday night, as well as again like exclusive stuff. And people who donate more, I have them on for like guest podcasts and guest critical thoughts as well. It's just been hard to get people to donate at that tier, but that's a marketing thing we can talk about after our little chat. Um,
Totally.
but what was the topic? Oh yeah, getting back to again parsing. Again, we'll just switch to 15 different topics like it's
We've
nothing.
talked so much for
I
like,
know.
what the hell are we talking about?
I know. But again, to quickly wrap up, being able to understand that someone saying that something is bad, you have to be able to look at that deeper and go, okay, why is it bad? They can say, this level sucks, but
Yeah,
you have to be able to look at going, why? Where are they getting stuck at? And again, it's very hard. As we said, for developers, video games are like your baby. They're your children. And having people complain, it's like someone going up to a parent saying, your child is fat and stupid. We don't like it. But you have to be able to understand what it means to be able to parse this kind of stuff out. I mean, I've spoken to John Brieger, who does playtesting, and that was one of the things that we've talked about at length. That being able to understand the good and the bad is critical. Again, if one person says they hate your game, okay, it could be a troll comment, it could be bad. If
right.
75 people say they hate your game or this part's stupid, okay, maybe I should pay attention. And here's my final one last thing. Dylan asked, "Do you let people send games?" I typically try to play games that are already been established, but I am open to fan-made games. I let everyone vote on them. So I have a spreadsheet that goes up that people can add fan-made games to. They want me to check it out. But here's my final thought, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about FTL and games like that. There's a difference between uh, rigidly adhering to your vision and being able to listen to people. At the
Yeah,
end of the day, you can be malleable. You can change things up as best you can, but you still need to keep to a solid. You still need to envision what your game is, what your game is about. When I spoke to a developer, Charles, who did the game, oh crap, what was it? Concealed Intent, I think that was what it was called. He talked about how he was open to a lot of changes to his game because he wanted his game to be as popular as possible. But there was one thing he would not change. He would not change the core gameplay loop. Because he said this, and it's a very simple phrase, but it works. If I change that, then I don't have that game anymore. I have a completely different game. And that's what same thing we
yeah,
said about FTL Into the Breach. They could have made those games easier. They could have added in, easy mode or an autoplay mode. But is that taking away from your vision? Because at the end of the day, if your game doesn't have a vision, you don't have something that people are going to want to play. You're going to have the same game that everyone has already played before, or something very derivative, or you'll just have a complete mess. You'll have a game that has everything and anything in it, but who's going to want to play that? Again, who wants to play that game that's like 15 different genres of all the most popular games?
yeah.
Oh,
Jalen brings up a good point. Says pay attention to
mm-hmm,
specific criticism, not the people that say your game sucks because you don't know what needs to be changed to satisfy them. I would also add on to that
mm-hmm,
that the difference between, first of all, not all feedback is good feedback and not all
Mm-hmm.
feedback is bad feedback. I see people that when I give them feedback, they will defend their choices and tell me why,
Mm-hmm.
because they think all feedback is bad feedback. Then there are people that when I give them feedback, they
Mm-hmm.
will listen to everything that I have to say and they'll put in everything that I tell them to do because they think all feedback is good feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a balance there
Yeah.
between bad feedback and good feedback. You got to figure out what to take and what to discard. And in addition to that, I think there's difference between what people say, people do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, a lot of my testers for the early versions of Phobia, they would say the game is good, but then they wouldn't play it again.
Mm-hmm.
That tells me something, right? The
Mm-hmm.
game is not good enough to get them to play again. The game is not good enough to get them to play a second time.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Also, like when I was talking about my shadow, nobody told me specifically, nobody said, Tim, your shadows feel like they're moving the platforms. And when I'm trying to do precision jumping,
Mm-hmm.
it's messing up my jumps. What happened was they continually died there. They said this game is frustrating. They said this level is frustrating. They said I hate these jumping platforms. They said a series of things, and it wasn't until I watched them play a series of people all say the same things and do the same things that I realized, oh, the shadows look like they're moving platforms. People are having trouble with precision jumps in this game
Mm-hmm.
because the shadows look like they are moving the
Yeah.
platforms. That's how I realized that was a problem. Not because
It's
people told me, because people didn't understand that. You know, they
exactly.
didn't realize what was happening. They just knew
It's
that it was frustrating to them. So feedback is important, but don't listen to what everyone says and really watch what they do.
mm-hmm. Yep, it's kind of. I think when I spoke with John about this, it's kind of like you're solving a mystery. You know there's a problem, you just don't know why there's a problem. And
Right.
your example with the shadows, for instance, if you were to leave this up to just reviewers or reviews looking at your game, you'll probably get people saying game has hard platforming or platforming is
Exactly.
unresponsive. Well, okay, but why? And that drilling that down is when things get that's where things get tricky because again you could have gone in a completely 180 direction. You could have said, you know what, if people don't like my platform, I'm going to completely rebuild the engine for it. That will
Yeah.
fix it. But
And player suggestions often too.
mm-hmm.
That's another one. Is players can always tell you what a problem is,
Mm-hmm.
but oftentimes their suggestions are way out of
Oh
whack.
yes.
So listen to the problems that they tell you about, but don't necessarily implement the solutions that they suggest.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they could be right, but again, you have to keep to that core vision, and if something's going to
Yeah.
change it, you have to be really careful because again, as Ether said a few minutes ago, you can't please everybody. And I've said this
Yeah.
before,
If you're
but
trying to please everybody, you've already lost.
yeah, I've said this before. There is no such thing as a 100% accessible game. A game that everybody is going to love. It's going to get a 10 out of 10, casual to hardcore players. Everyone's going to, hold hands and sing about your game. It's not going to happen. And trying to design a game like that is just madness. It's better to have a game that is amazing to a core group than trying to reach everybody. Because sometimes
Yeah.
if your game is good enough, you may expand that audience. Again, there are people who've played Dark Souls who probably have never touched a roguelike before. Or I'm trying to think of some other good example, or FTL. FTL being another really great
Yeah.
example. Sometimes if the game is great enough, it can open doors. But if they try to conform and make it more accessible or more marketing esque, I guess, or more focus tested, that's the term I wanted to use, it wouldn't be the same game.
I think the same thing applies to your marketing as well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people ask me, Tim, do you have any tips? Them, hey, who is your game for? And they'll say everybody. The problem with that is, like, for example, I did some marketing with supplements, right? With fitness supplements. The way that I market fitness supplements to bodybuilding males, a lot different than I would sell
Mm-hmm.
purses to 20-year-old
Yeah.
females. right? I can't include both of those people in the same group
Mm-hmm.
because the words that resonate with them are going to be different. On the internet, there's a like a meme of like the marketing like trainers hate him, the underground secrets to how to pack on muscle quick. We laugh at that, but guess what? We're not the target audience.
Mm-hmm.
The bodybuilder that's on the internet looking for the underground secrets on how to grow muscle, he sees that ad and he's like, "Oh my god, this is it. I want to buy this. These are the underground secrets so I can get buffer than my friend at the gym," right? So like making that message specific as possible, making your game as specific as possible to the person that you want it to be is super important because the second if I tried to sell that same supplement to everybody and I said a supplement for everybody that does everything, that dude from the gym wouldn't buy it,
Mm-hmm.
right? The chick from the with the that's trying to buy the purses wouldn't buy it. Like I lose all of my sales by trying to include everybody,
Yeah.
right? By making that message specific enough to one type of person, that's when I get that core message that resonates.
Yeah.
Same thing with a game. That's when that game like really, really, really is powerful to that one person.
Yeah. But with that said, I want to throw in a very important caveat. It's still important when you're trying to sell a game to someone to look at the new person or the first timers when it comes to how your game is being played. Because there is a very big difference between making a game for, let's say, a hardcore tower defense game versus making a game that only a hardcore tower defense guy can play
Yes,
because
I agree.
there's nothing in there to latch onto. Again, I said this talking to you, Tim. I've said this many times over, but I respect the grand strategy genre from Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, to Lars, but I cannot play those games because I have nothing as a new player to latch onto, and they have just not been able to get that down to the point of saying, how does someone brand new approach these games? So it's important to have a core audience, but you have to understand if you're trying to make your game playable to people, what does it mean for a first timer? Because having an easy to understand UI and a streamlined control scheme is not going to hurt the hardcore experience. So it could make those players into hardcore fans, but they need something to start with. But again, I'm starting to get tired here. I know you are as well. If we start getting more into that, we're going to wrap it up. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say this. I should have said this actually 5 minutes ago, but final call for any last minute questions. So we're going to wrap things up in like the next minute or two. So if you have any, get them in now, or otherwise we're going to both just collapse at our keyboards for tonight.
Yeah. Indie Development Lab says sometimes there aren't bugs in the code, but bugs in the game design. And I agree with that. I think that's why new developers don't actually try and design a game, that they develop an existing game with an existing design. Because design, I think, is a lot easier to do wrong than development is.
Yeah, design, again, it's not something you can really put into words. Again, programming, you can uh, you can build something that's technically optimized. There are hard skills as to what makes this engine work, what makes it doesn't work. But then when you throw in how does it work with my UI, or again, as you said with platforming, for instance, like your example with the shadows, that's not a technical issue. If you were just to stare at your code for all day long, you would have never have seen the problem like that. But when you
Yeah.
start throwing design in, that's when things get very murky. And again, that's another 4 hours right there we could talk to.
Yeah.
Mike says, where do you see each other in 5 years? I don't know. I think the someone has it there. 5 years older, lost more sleep and more facial hair. I'm hoping to do more with my presentations, and again, I would like to be that person to make game design more transparent to people. To be able to talk about this with all the designers and all the consumers as well, and try to elevate the discussion of game criticism.
That's cool. I think you're already doing a good job of that. You just
Mm-hmm.
got to continue doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
For me, see myself, I don't know, having a heavy hitter game out there. Um, I have a book I'm working on. I hope to be speaking at more places. Hope to have a GDC talk. Would love to do a TED talk. 5 years is a long time though. I don't know. We'll
Yeah.
see.
I'm actually working on an ebook myself at the moment about games, 20 great games for designers to study. I am almost done. I'm at 19 and a half, so fingers crossed. And then I have to think about what do I do then? And once I have this draft done, maybe I'll talk to you and talk to my friends about it as well.
Totally.
All right, but oh my goodness, a Tim for TED Talk. All right. Thank you, Dylan. Yeah, again, it has been great. So I think to wrap things up, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about a little bit more about myself or the new folks from your side coming on, and then I'll throw things over to you, Tim, for your final
Cool.
thoughts on everything. So for you guys who've been watching me, thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, we do daily discussions on game design here as well as on my main site, game-wisdom.com. I do game streaming or let's plays as well as indie game spotlights. And like I said, I'm trying to do at least one developer live cast each week, but we may do more than that. I also do my live show Sundays at 3 p.m. EST, where I talk with my friend and co-host Robert Leach about game design and industry topics. And like I said, if you like support the Patreon, it's patreon.com/WBicer. I appreciate all the support that I get. It goes towards allowing me to grow and doing this full time. And again, $1 is all you need to get into our private Discord channel, as well as more features over there. But other than that, like I said, if you're a developer who's working on a game and like to talk about design, please get in touch with me. And of course, I am always looking for new people and new games to spotlight. But that does it for me. My voice is about to die. So I guess Tim, for you, do you have any final thoughts or anything you would like to close out our cast on?
Yeah. If you haven't made a game, make a game. If you haven't designed a game, you know, design a game. Do the things that people tell you can't do. Make them happen. Get stuff out there and be awesome. You guys can find me at Game Dev Underground on YouTube. Just search it. At Tim Ruswick on Twitter. You can tweet me. We also have a Discord. It's in the description of all my videos. Um, yeah, that's it. Everybody's calling me Jim because somebody called me Jim once in a Feedback Friday stream, so everybody never forgets that.
Oh, and my Twitter at GW if I didn't mention it earlier or if you didn't see it. But I think
Follow him
that's
on Twitter, join his Patreon, do all that stuff. It's
and
awesome. I love his channel. Make sure you subscribe.
thank you, Tim, and be sure to check out Tim's work. And someone asked this earlier. You're doing a Feedback Friday, I guess. Again, for those of you watching this in the future, it'll probably be gone by now, but you're going to be doing one tomorrow night, right?
Yeah, I usually do them Friday night, 7 p.m. EST. That's usually the day and time.
All right. And I also have to say, we're both on the same, I think, time zone, right? You're in Florida. Are we on the same time zone, Tim?
I don't know. What time is it there?
It's 11:01.
Yeah, it's 11 here. So
All
no,
right.
we're not.
Well, at least it's great to talk to someone reasonably close because I've had
Yeah.
developers. I spoke to someone from Cape Town, Africa, when
Oh,
it was like tomorrow afternoon their time when it was like my time in the evening. So it's at least great. But again, I talked to international guests as well. We talked to some of the developers from Abbey Light Studios. Um, oh man, I spoke with one of the designers from Crow Team a few years ago about the Talos Principle, which was
oh,
a
cool.
lot of fun there. And I recently spoke with Paul and Fred from Star Control. That was a really great cast. Hope to have them on, but it takes like 3 to 4 years for them to respond. But
Gotcha.
one last question for you: when is the latest to submit games for your thing for Feedback Friday?
For feed when we're gonna have a stream on feedback, when it's gonna be stream, Patreon members get the form on Wednesdays. Discord members get the form on Thursdays.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're not in one of those two things, you got to come early to the stream and submit before I shut it down because usually the games pile up so quick I have to turn the form off or I'll just be there for infinity.
All right, great. Well, that is going to do it for tonight. Again, we could jump on any number of topics, but I think we're both starting to feel it at this point. But Tim, if you're free in the future, it would be great to have you back on, or I can make a guest spot on your thing. Because again, when it comes to game design, there's just a never-ending amount of topics we can jump to.
Totally, dude. This was fun. I had fun doing this. It's a lot of fun. We'll do it again in the future.
Awesome. So, with that said, we're going to end things here for tonight. For you folks watching this live, I would like to thank you so much for coming out. If you're watching this record and would like to get this archived earlier and ad-free, again, patreon.com/GWBycer. All of our VIP supporters get these streams like that. My name is Josh, by the way, Josh Bycer. So, sorry about that, Dylan. I know, it's Thursday already. It feels like, again, I said this earlier, time and space means nothing to me anymore. I've lost all track of time doing these things.
Yeah.
But I may be doing a late night game stream in a few minutes, but otherwise, check back for daily discussions here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games, and check out Tim's site. And do you have a website, Tim, or is it just the YouTube channel?
I have a website, gdu.io, but the main thing is Game Dev Underground.
All right. Be sure to check that out. I think you're kind of cutting out a little bit. It could also be the internet acting up after all the storms. But
gdu.io, GDU, Game Dev Underground, the initial.
all right.
That's it.
All right. So, with that said, we will be wrapping things up. So, again, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to come back for those regular streams as well as my game spotlights. Check out Tim as well. But that is going to do it. So, thanks again for watching. I am going to probably go drink a gallon of water and prepare for my next thing. Until next time,
see you guys later.
have a great night.